You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. So part 2 of our long hurricane coverage week, it would seem, and we are now tracking Hurricane Douglas, which is headed very close to the islands of Hawaii and still can't rule out an actual landfall in the next 24 hours on one of these islands. Quite clear to see where the storm is in relation to the islands right now, and it's going to be Maui that's the first place to receive the full force, potentially, of Hurricane Douglas. My name is Nathan Foy. I'm joined, as always, by our team, which in this segment consists of Ike, Codemo, and Strad. Good afternoon to you all, and evening.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to a lot of people, and good morning to people in Hawaii right now, actually.
Yep, 8 o'clock on the dot. That's our live stream start time. We're going to go for 10, weren't we? Was it 10 o'clock that we were going to go for? But
it was about that.
We brought it back because we had a little issue with one of the video uploads, so we just figured it would be better to go live now. And so we have, and here we are live. There's the latest imagery. The update has just come out from the National Hurricane Center, and they are keeping it at 90 miles per hour and a rather high pressure of 987 millibars. That's the latest update, closing in still, as the National Hurricane Center headline says. No changes with the advisory. If you've missed it so far, a hurricane warning now in effect for Maui County, Oahu, and Kauai County, and a tropical storm warning for Hawaii. A tropical storm watch for portions of the Papahana Umokakea, or something like that, Marine National Monument from Nihoa to French Frigate Shoals to Morrow Reef. I knew I'd get that one wrong. Hurricane warning means that hurricane conditions are expected somewhere within the warning area, in this case within the next 24 hours. A tropical storm warning means that tropical storm conditions are expected in the next 12 hours. Tropical storm watch means that tropical storm conditions are possible within the watch area in the next 36 to 48 hours. And interests elsewhere should monitor the progress of the system. So we are expecting potentially strong winds, of course, hurricane conditions. Large swells could be life-threatening and potentially destructive in its surf. Storm surge could raise the water levels as much as 3 feet above normal tides near the center of Douglas. And rainfall estimates. Heavy rainfall is expected to affect portions of the main Hawaiian Islands from early this morning into Monday. Total rain accumulations of 5 to 10 inches are possible from Maui County westward to Kauai County, with the greatest amounts up to 15 inches in elevated terrain. This rain may result in life-threatening flash flooding and landslides, as well as rapid water level rises on small streams. Douglas could produce an additional 2 to 4 inches of rainfall over the northern half of the Big Island. The next update will be at 11 a.m. Hawaiian time. And that was the 8 a.m. update from the National Hurricane Center. Those who are still wondering about Hannah, that is still a tropical storm at 1 p.m. Central Time. I will show it you shortly. They've just lifted the warnings, so I'm just going to get to work on the graphics for that for the bottom part of our screen so we can move on. But whilst we take a look at that visible imagery for the time being, let's get thoughts from some of our team members. Who'd like to go first?
I'd just like to point out, this originally we were looking at Douglas a couple days ago, when it first formed, really, as a system that could go to mostly the south of Hawaii was the consensus forecast. The fact that we're seeing it come pretty close to land right now and potential to make a landfall on one of the Hawaiian Islands is unfortunate to say the least. The satellite imagery is telling a clear picture, and I think you said earlier, before we went live, that on radar you can actually start to see the eye wall now.
You will be. I'll show you that very shortly.
Yep.
If it does make a hurricane landfall on the Hawaiian Islands, it's pretty much the first time in the internet era. Last time was 1992 when it was just about getting onto its feet. But very, very long time since the last time we saw a hurricane landfall on the islands. And that was
But I think
Iniki, which did it in some fashion, Category 4.
I think it's very notable, though, to say that conditions, especially on Maui right now, are going to begin to deteriorate very quickly. I saw someone in the live stream chat before the stream about like 30 to 45 minutes ago saying that that they weren't really seeing anything. What's going on? Well, if you look at the radar and satellite imagery right now, you're going to start to see heavier bands associated with the hurricane begin to move onshore very quickly now. So if you are in Maui in particular at the moment, your preparation should already be complete, and you should be doing everything you can to stay safe right now.
And we can now run to that radar. There we go. This is the latest on Hurricane Douglas. And you can quite... Nope, that is the wrong bar. Excellent. Hannah made landfall yesterday. That's wonderful.
A lot of that heaviest rainfall
there
right
we
now
go.
is
It's gone.
just offshore.
It's gone. It's gone. It's gone. We got it right
gone
now.
up.
It was still an overlay. Okay, great. So, detracting from that, here is the storm's eye wall, and you can see a lot of reds there, Strat. Kahului is not too far from some significant bands, but as you can see, most areas aren't receiving anything too significant just yet.
Yeah, and again, that goes to someone that was saying they're in Maui and they weren't seeing anything yet, asking what was up. As the storm gets really close, and if it does make a landfall on one of these islands, it'll likely be within 6 to 12 hours, at least for the current island that it's closest to. I think it's Oahu all the way further out to the northwest. That would be potentially, if it tries to make a landfall there, closer to 18 hours from now. But its closest approach to Maui is going to be significantly sooner than that. And, as is seen on radar right now, those heaviest bands are pretty close to shore. So while things might not be too rough imminently or immediately, they should deteriorate pretty quickly.
Was someone trying to speak just there? Or maybe not. Onto the visible satellite imagery, and you can see whether or not, Strat, that the case is that it's actually making a run for another small intensification phase, because models were suggesting that could have been a possibility a few days ago.
I mean, it doesn't look bad at all on satellite imagery, at least for a minimal category 1. The eye is visible on infrared, but on radar it is pretty clear, and from what we can see so far at least, pretty well structured at least.
It's still blowing up a lot of convection wrapping around. It's just, well, it's still clearly a hurricane.
Yeah, I mean the storm actually looks a bit wider than it was earlier today as well, in terms of the general area where that convection's reaching.
Yeah, I mean, for the area it's in, it's doing really well. I mean, it was kind of surprising that it's been handling this well.
But waters are warmer up there, although the shear was higher as well. I assume that's still the case. I've not actually checked on that one, but the waters near the Hawaiian Islands are warm. And it was the HWRF model that was the first one to point out that it couldn't re-intensify. It brought it from category 2 to 3 near those islands, pretty much where it is right now. Well, that's not going to happen. But then the GFS followed a little bit, keeping its intensity, and it is holding.
Yeah, that is true. Fortunately, it hasn't really re-strengthened yet, but it's really held on to its intensity longer than the initial forecasts were calling for when Hawaii first came into the cone. We were first looking for a moderate tropical storm if it made a close approach to the islands, and now we're at a high in category 1 hurricane still. And another unfortunate note is the strongest convection and bands associated with the storm are actually on the southwestern quadrant, which is the one that's going to be making the closest approach to the Hawaiian Islands right now. Yeah, if you just take a look at the infrared, it tells the clear story. The strongest winds aren't necessarily there, but the strongest convection that will likely lead to the harshest rainfall totals have, at this point in time at least, been wrapped around to the southwestern quadrant of the system. It's pretty clear just based on where the highest cloud tops are right now on the screen. But at the same time, those can still have the opportunity to wrap to the southeast quadrant and hopefully northeast quadrant to stay furthest away from impacts.
Now, reconnaissance planes have been in and around the storm quite frequently. Are they around right now?
Let me take a quick look at that as well, because I know they were flying several in. There actually is one in right now.
There is.
That was getting category 2 flight level winds in the northwestern quadrant of the storm. SFMR readings around 80 or 75 knots there. And no hurricane force winds, at least at flight level. on the southeastern quadrant of the storm, so it's much weaker there for the time being, at least. It's actually heading up to the northeastern quadrant right now as we
Well,
speak.
that's the thing. Given that it is still a hurricane, and the model's suggesting that even as it moves across the islands, the hurricane force winds are all on the northern side, and the southern side will have much weaker winds. So, what's the highest that they've got down there on the southern side?
On the southeastern quadrant right now, the strongest SFMR readings that they were getting were around 60 knots, so just shy of hurricane strength on those. And those match pretty well, pretty close to what they were getting at flight level as well. I'm going to be more interested to see what the southwestern quadrant has when they take the next pass there, though, because that's the one that's going to be closest to land right now, and it currently also has the strongest convection. So, I mean, it doesn't detract from the strength of the storm or potential land impacts if the northern side is stronger. In terms of winds, though, and the southern side's the one impacting the islands more. It's still a very life-threatening storm, however you put
Where's
it, really.
that noise coming from?
I don't know.
Did you hear that? How very strange. Look, that noise right there. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear it too.
How
I don't
very
know.
odd. Is that you, Ike? Yes, it is. It is. Okay, so looking at the wide shot, you can see Douglas there, very close to the islands now, literally on top of them. But lots of people are asking about Invest 92L in the Atlantic. Well, I suppose it's wise to, because it's looking better every day, and there it is once again in the eastern half of the Atlantic, and it's got the rotation. It's getting organized. It's rather broad, but the models are almost unanimously, if not actually unanimously, on board with not just development, but development into a significant tropical cyclone.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they upped it to 60, I think 60, 90, so 60% chance, or 70% actually, for development in the next 2 days now, and 90% in the next 5 days. Fortunately for the Caribbean, at least much of it, the models overall within the next 5 days, where the most reliable forecasting period that we can really trust are leaning towards taking it north of the Leeward Islands, although the very northeastern parts of them could get some impacts, particularly near Barbuda as well. But the European, at least the last one I saw, is still taking it further south in the current envelope. It also has it significantly weaker, though, which could be one of the root causes for that.
Yes. So let's bring it back. I'm just trying to get some more stuff up here, but let's go back to the radar imagery again, and you can see the western side. For some reason, there's a big gap on the eastern side of the radar coverage. I don't know really why that gap's there. And I checked the one further northwest as well, and there's another gap on that one, which is right at the storm center. This is the best radar there is right now. And you can see the bulk of the storm is just about to make its presence felt on Maui, and then beyond later on. Hurricane warnings for almost all of these islands, so almost all of the main islands now, apart from the Big Island.
Even though the Big Island can be seen getting a slight of the impact already.
What are you seeing there?
Screen that I'm using currently, you can just see a little bit of the little bit of it on the south side is particularly starting to make a couple of impacts on the north of the island.
Yeah, I mean, overall, though, it's fortunate that the most populated parts of the Big Island are going to see more minimal impacts overall, though. Most of the heavy rainfall is staying offshore of the Big Island, at least to the north, but other Hawaiian islands could still see very significant impacts from that rain van.
Yep. I'm just trying to get one of the webcams loaded here, so I'm just working on that whilst we continue to look at the radar. When do we think the landfall's going to be, though?
The closest approach to Maui on the cone, at least, was at 0Z on the 27th of July. So that's about 6 hours from now. It really depends on if it wobbles at all or takes a jog in a certain direction a bit quicker or slower, really. But the closest approach to at least the Maui County should be about 6 hours from now, give or take a tiny bit of time frame. And then on the other hand of that, though, Kauai is going to be around 12Z tomorrow, which is going to be around 8 a.m. Eastern, 2 a.m. Hawaiian time, just about. So overnight for that time frame for those islands.
Yep, so that's going to be over quite a few hours for the islands. And any further comment on Hannah, by the way, because that's saying goodbye to us now.
I haven't really seen much satellite imagery of it since last night's video update. I'll take a quick look at it right now. It's really lost a lot of its core structure since last night. You know,
about impacts, have we heard anything?
I haven't heard too much yet today. Although I will say, notably, as of I think it was 6:30 a.m. Eastern today, 5:30 a.m. Central, they were still expecting in parts of northern Mexico an additional 15 to 20 inches of rainfall from the system. So even though it's much weaker and its winds are rapidly dying off, the general risk from the system is still very large.
I've actually got a webcam up here now. That's on the northern part of the Big Island, so that's pretty close to the storm. I imagine it's looking out northwards. You're not seeing too much there. A lot of cloud cover in the background, but that's a live look from Hawaii County. So it's looking rather still there, actually. So not much going on there at the moment, but it's nice to look at, I guess.
And in the chat, I saw a pretty interesting question. It was asking what the CDPS is currently for Douglas.
We think it's around a 2 right now. But if it did, that's based on the storm not making a full landfall, though. So if it did make a full hurricane landfall, I'd imagine it'd be a stage 3.
Yeah, so I mean, significant damage is definitely possible for land areas from this, which is why people, particularly in the northwestern Hawaiian island chain, should be monitoring this especially closely as the storm makes its closest approach to them.
All right, let's see if we can take some questions then.
Yeah, I was just going to say, someone said, and I think it's important to reiterate a little bit, Douglas entered warm water again. Why is it still dying, is what they're asking now.
Well, it's not still dying. It's maintained intensity for 24 hours now.
It's a little weaker than yesterday, but not much.
It's been overall shrinking. That's probably the main reason that this pressure's gone up.
Yeah, and I mean, it entered a pretty sheer filled area, so...
Yeah. I mean, overall, though, it's maintained its intensity much better than initial forecasts were calling for. So,
yes,
it was expected a couple days ago that it'd be a tropical storm at this point.
At this point, yeah.
And could still give significant impacts from tropical storm, obviously, but at least the wind speeds weren't expected to be near where they are right now.
But it's still 90 miles an hour. It's the same strength as Hannah at landfall still.
Yeah, that's very true.
Although the pressure's much higher.
Instead of really dissipating sooner, though, with the original forecast for lower wind speeds, the system is now expected to get into the western Pacific as a full tropical storm.
No. You can't tell me that.
The day 4 spot is past the 180-degree mark as a tropical storm, which would mean if no other systems form in the western Pacific between now and day 4, and that forecast verifies, this system would be the 3rd system of the year in the western Pacific, and it didn't even come from there.
Good lord.
Would it be the only one in July as well, Douglas?
No. It would not. Halola was in July. 5 years ago.
I'm curious. It's going to be a race at the end to see if this system actually gets there in time. Okay, Thursday's July 30th, so we might technically have a storm in the western Pacific this month, but it won't even really come from the western Pacific.
Anyway, enough on that. The visible imagery shows maybe 1 or 2 little holes appearing where the eye is. That it might be clearing just a little bit. But I'm not convinced when you look at the infrared. The imagery is showing on the northern side, looking pretty flaky. We've got another view now from, this is from Ike. Do we know where this is?
Maui.
That's on Maui, so looks like it's
Hawaii,
raining
yeah,
there.
Maui.
But I'm still not seeing light winds. Not much to talk about there just yet. Do we know which way that's facing?
I don't know any Hawaii geography.
Ah, that's a shame. Ike is more familiar with the other side of the Pacific in the Philippines.
Yeah.
But halfway across the ocean you've got Hurricane Douglas, which is about to make landfall in the Hawaiian Islands. Or is it? That's the question. And again, some models suggesting it might not make a full landfall, but there could be significant rain impacts for some of these islands, potentially up to 15 inches, along with a storm surge of 3 feet if the center of the storm makes landfall. And strong winds which could gust to hurricane force, but at the moment we're not seeing much evidence of that on land just yet. But it's a rather small influence this storm has, so it's not quite there yet, but it's very close to really starting to deliver those strong winds.
Yeah, and if it comes on shore, really, through some sort of landfall, storm surge, even if it's only 3 feet, can be a significant threat. Really, we saw Hannah yesterday deliver significant damage, and we went over some of the photos on stream yesterday. And more of those have really come in overnight of, low-lying coastal areas, docks, piers, taking really a heavy blow from Hannah. So don't discount storm surge as a potential risk to life and property, even if it only sounds as little as 3 feet of inundation.
Yeah, I can't imagine there's all that many places that would be affected by 3 feet on these islands, though.
That's true. Texas's geography with the barrier islands is a bit different than what we're seeing here.
Let's see if we can get that visible back. Here's a better look at the visible, and you can see all of the storm now rather than cut off half of it. And yeah, it would appear that the eye is starting to appear a little bit more on the visible satellite imagery. Probably doesn't mean a whole lot. It's either that the eye is clearing or that dry air is interacting with the storm. But until we know for sure, I wouldn't read too much into what we're seeing right now, and that could change very quickly as well. And nonetheless, radar is the best way to look at this storm. It's ahead of satellite. Radar first, then satellite is always the best order to prioritize your viewing methods. Strat?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Preston's in the call. He's muted right now, but he has a webcam from the southwest side of Maui facing southwest. If you want to be able to pull it up for a little bit.
Ah, yes, that looks a little bit more, more
definitely
light.
a bit more inclement there.
Yeah, inclement is the right word. Visibility dropping to a couple miles, maybe 5 miles. Hard to tell on the imagery. Still
Wind
not
definitely picking up a little
much
bit,
wind. Probably raining. It's in a shelter, so we're not fully sure on that. No real signs of surge, I don't think. But again, not being familiar with the area, it's somewhat hard to tell. If you've got any comments or questions for us live on the air, we are here to serve, so send them in. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. We might be able to help a lot more effectively if we actually directly answer the questions. I don't think any are in just yet, so we'll keep looking at this for a moment. Could Douglas get stronger in the Western Pacific, or are conditions too bad for that?
I highly doubt it.
The model consensus says that conditions will be too hostile for it to really have a second breath in the Western Pacific.
And
it's
they
really,
are very hostile that way.
Yeah, particularly at the latitude is going to be heading at the forecast model consensus.
The central West Pacific at 25 north? Nuh-uh. Not going to be much forming there.
All models that I've seen so far, at least, try to completely obliterate the storm between days like 5 and 6 at most now. So it might barely survive into the Western Pacific. But after that point, get ripped apart pretty quickly by even less favorable conditions than what's going to be seeing for the rest of its journey in the Central Pacific after it passes Hawaii.
People are asking if we are doing Force 13 Sundays tonight. That's our community hour, but we are still in Code Red, so that means that it has been cancelled. All of our normal programming is cancelled during Code Red events, so that won't be happening tonight. We'll be here instead doing more updates. I don't know if we'll still be live by that point, but I'm sure there'll be video updates throughout the day in Hawaii. And that there's a tornado warning in Texas, Strat.
Let me take a quick look at that. I wouldn't be surprised because Hannah's now, even though it's a bit inland into Mexico, still firing up some convection right on shore Texas and a bit further out from that as well, so it wouldn't be too shocking. Let me take a look. There is a tornado warning in effect in southern Texas right now, so that seems to be what's happening.
Location?
For northeastern Brooks County, severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado was located near La Gloria or near Fremont, moving northwest at 55 miles an hour. The tornado warning is in place due to radar-indicated rotation at this time. Fortunately, the tornadic thunderstorm is forecast to remain over mainly rural areas of northeastern Brooks County, including Cantu Addition, Brooks County Detention Center, Flawela, and Brooks County Airport are the nearest locations to that, really.
Thank you for that. Could Douglas make a landfall or impact on Midway? Now that is way over to the west, obviously implied by the name. I'm trying to re-familiarize myself as to where Midway Island actually is, because I get confused with Johnston Atoll and a bunch of other places. And Wake Island. Where's Midway? I'm trying to find it.
It's well to the west-northwest of Hawaii. So...
Oh, it's along the chain.
Yeah, except it's, I think it's at least 1,000 miles dislocated from it.
I've found it, yes. No, the storm will probably pass south of there, believe it or not.
Yep, and as it's doing so, continue to weaken. So fortunately...
Yeah, I'd imagine it would be a weak tropical storm by the time it makes its closest pass there.
Yep.
And by the way, that would be impressive if you are actually on Midway Island.
I would say so. Later in the forecast period with Douglas, though, right now at least, it wouldn't be too surprising considering the conditions it's entering if it ends up weakening a bit faster than forecast at the moment. Once we get to days 3 to 5, and it's nearing the Western Pacific and crossing over into the basin. But like has happened so far, it's been pretty resilient and held its intensity together better than initial estimates were really saying could happen. So you never know. We really could end up seeing this get a crossover.
Yeah, as for landfall, though, right now, it looks like the storm has just taken a jog to the northwest, and I think you can see that on satellite as well. Get the satellite back. No, not so much on satellite, but on radar, it looks like it's just taken a jog northwest, and that could be crucial. Then again, it could just as easily be a trick of the radar.
I mean, yeah, we'll have to wait a little bit and see, really. But, I mean, the further north this thing moves right now, the less likely it is that the worst impacts can be felt onshore in the United States, and particularly Hawaii right now. So always have to be optimistic for that, really. Someone's asking, what are the sea surface temperatures around the storm right now, if we want to check that out real quick.
Yeah, I've not had time to look in depth at the sea surface temperatures. I assume that they are at least marginally warm, otherwise you wouldn't be seeing the storm still at this strength.
Yeah,
I'll literally just, I'm just going to get it now. And temperatures are, yeah, 27 degrees or so. The further west it goes along the island chain, though, the warmer the temperatures get. So it might just have a brief chance as it passes Oahu, might have a brief chance as it approaches Kauai of an intensification by 5 or 10 miles an hour.
Yep, always possible. We got to keep the monitoring up for that.
The good news is that obviously further north the waters are cooler. If the storm had gone due west by now and stayed further south, or if it was south of the Hawaiian Islands in the first place and came up from the south to make landfall on one of the islands, the temperatures would have been much warmer and this storm would most likely be stronger, given that it's looking like this even taking the northerly route.
Yeah. I mean, for the time being, though, at least, the worst impacts, at least from convection, which is, usually indicative of stronger rainfall with those higher cloud tops, are on the southeastern quadrant of the storm. So if that doesn't change and we get a really close approach to Maui, the heaviest rainfall, at least associated with the storm, could be coming inland due to those. It's going to be interesting to see when reconnaissance gets a pass to the southwestern side to see how strong that side is exactly.
Yeah, are they on that right
Uh,
now?
They're still flying up to the tip of the northeastern quadrant as of the last update, which came in about 15 minutes ago. They're about to take the left turn that they're going to have to do to fly in from the northeastern quadrant, sample the wind speeds in what is typically the strongest quadrant for wind speeds in tropical cyclones in the northern hemisphere, and then they'll go straight into the southwestern side, which is going to be the side closest to land, and from that we'll be able to see how strong the winds are with this system on the side that's closest to having impacts on land right now.
A question, or I think was it a statement? I'm not sure. Something about that the eye is reforming. It's not so much that it's reforming, just that it's becoming a little bit more well defined on the satellite, maybe, and definitely on the radar. We've not had radar for very long because it's not been within coverage that long, but obviously it's quite clearly there now. So I'm not sure we're seeing a reformation or a strengthening of the eye, but it's always been there and it is still there.
Yeah, I mean, we did have an eye roll replacement cycle in the past with this storm, but through the whole past about 2 days or so, we've had reconnaissance aircraft flying in and out of it at least a few times now, and like we've been talking about, there's one in right now. We haven't really had the actual eye, completely fall apart, per se. It can get clouded over on infrared and visible satellite imagery when, there's tops covering over the actual eye of the storm, but it hasn't necessarily disappeared or is like reforming, if we want to talk about it in that regard. I'm going to be
Now,
really interested to see
Ike, where's this?
Kula.
And where's that?
In Maui.
Okay, yep. So, is that inland there? It looks like.
Yes, it's inland.
And I presume that's closer to the center and northeastern side of the island, considering the conditions there are looking worse than the webcam we saw in the southwestern part of the island earlier.
Well, there's a lot of higher cloud coverage at the minute, so if it's at a higher altitude, then you're more likely to see a scene like this.
Yep.
A lot of the high altitude clouds are already over the islands. The lower altitude clouds and the worst of the storm is obviously still offshore.
Yep.
Do we think this is a stronger version of Derby? Well, it is really.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big storm. Yeah.
Now, Derby was a few years ago. I can't remember which island it hit. That wasn't straight into the Big Island, was it? Iselle did that, didn't it? I believe. Hope I'm not getting confused.
Let me see if I can get the exact one for it. It was 2016, right?
Yeah, should be.
It impacted the Big Island as a tropical storm.
Hmm.
So it came, and it didn't come from, more of a northern angle, like Douglas is right now, or come a close approach from the south like Lane did. It basically moved almost due west, all the way from the border between the Eastern Pacific and Central Pacific straight to the Big Island. So, I mean, this is definitely stronger than that storm. This is a higher-end Category 1 hurricane at this point in time. But at least for the most populous parts of the Big Island of Hawaii, this storm is moving mostly to the north of that right now. So the impacts will be, fortunately, more limited than maybe what some people were expecting a couple days ago. As the storm stayed more resilient than expected, its track, fortunately, continued to shift north. The GFS was really hinting of that coming to fruition, and it really verified out pretty well. So
Lots of interest for the Invest in the Atlantic 92L. We'll have another little look at that now. This is the latest imagery from GOES 16, and there it is once again. Rather large system. It's enormous compared to Gonzalo, which is dead. And And it is already rotating, so no wonder the National Hurricane Center has a high chance of development on this in the next 5 days, near certainty actually, at 90%. The models are suggesting this could become a significant tropical cyclone, but we don't really know for sure just yet. For instance, the ECMWF model, which the National Hurricane Center puts a lot of stock in, last time I saw it, it was having a weak tropical storm make landfall in the Dominican Republic. And the other model, the GFS and other models, quite a lot of them were taking it up towards the Western Atlantic as a significant hurricane, category 2 or 3, and then recurving just off the Outer Banks and off the Carolinas and out towards the ocean, although the GFS in the last run had it as a landfall as a strong tropical storm in Newfoundland, so that was quite interesting.
Yeah, the latest GFS run develops it into a significant storm, bring it close approach to the northern Lesser Antilles and potentially close to the Bahamas right at the end of the 5-day mark in Turks and Caicos. That's really the end of the most reliable forecast time frame on it. But intensities, especially when you get out that far in a system that hasn't even formed yet, is much more difficult to forecast, really.
There's another look of Invest 92L from CodeMo's screen there.
It's still very broad.
Very
at this point in
much
time.
so.
So if it wants to become a tropical cyclone in the next 2 days, like the National Hurricane Center is saying, 70% of that, it's going to need to have some more organization than just the general rotation that it's having right now and close that center up, really.
Strat, comment section?
Yeah, someone's asking, and thank you for this. Could it become the first major hurricane?
92L?
Yeah, 92L. I mean,
Yes,
in
it could.
technicality, it's possible.
Yeah, it absolutely could.
But we can't actually say that right now.
We're not saying it will, no,
definitive.
but it absolutely could.
I'll be preparing for the worst, but just, I guess, keep an eye on the storm.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
just
it's not even
monitor
a
the
storm
development
yet,
of it,
so...
really. Intensity forecasting is the hardest thing for tropical cyclones, and
It is.
especially when there isn't even a defined center yet, like a closed center at least. It's harder for models to initialize tracks sometimes without that. That means the potential environmental conditions that it's going to be heading into are very different depending on where it goes. A lot of models bring it further north and have it barely scraping parts of the Leeward Islands, while the European model has it move through into the Caribbean Sea. So, especially when the track is still pretty uncertain of it, we can't really give it something too accurate at all about what its potential intensity could end up being. Rather
You
than
could,
just...
but it would be a dumb thing to do.
We could, but that would be more doom casting and wish casting and not actually relevant to what we actually have knowledge
Always
about
coming
yet.
out with all the weather lingo now.
It'd be more prudent to just monitor the general area between its current location and the Lesser Antilles for potential
Alright.
development first.
So that was all in reference to the Invest in the Atlantic 92L. On your screen now, again, is the radar imagery of Hurricane Douglas. The southwestern part of the eye wall looks like it's got an impressive little bit there. But in relation to comparing it to another recent storm, very recent, Hannah, yesterday, it doesn't look quite as good as what Hannah looked like on radar.
Although to be fair to it, there's that gap in the radar coverage on the southeastern
Doesn't
side.
look
so we can't
bad,
really
doesn't look
fully
bad,
see.
but I don't think it looks quite as good as Hannah did.
Yeah, I'd really want to see what that southeastern eye wall is looking like once it gets fully into the radar coverage zone, which is beginning to do so.
Nearly there.
Although notably on recon aircraft, there was no hurricane force winds in that southeastern eye wall of the storm, so it could potentially be significantly weaker.
That would be interesting. But as it stands right now, this storm still has winds of 90 miles per hour, which is must be about 145 kilometers per hour. A pressure of 987 millibars, and hurricane warnings for most of those islands. All of the main islands, apart from the Big Island, if I'm not mistaken, are under hurricane warnings. And hurricane conditions are likely anytime in the next few hours on Maui. It's going to make its closest pass pretty shortly, and then it will pass eventually north of Oahu, although some indications are showing that it could pile right into the island of Oahu as a landfall, so that's something to watch out for. We'll have to wait and see whether it does or not. Unfortunately, we can't tell the future just like that. It is quite a critical part of this storm's lifespan, because any small deviations to the north would bring it away from the islands quite comfortably. Any deviations to the south or further due west would increase the danger. So that's something that we'll be watching over the course of today, and we'll have no immediate answer as to whether these areas will ultimately be safe, and they've issued the hurricane warnings as a result. Let's see if we've got some more questions. It looks like the eye is expanding on the radar. From Clap Ryan there, that's an observation. Do you agree with that?
I mean, it's only really been 40 minutes, so it's hard to get a full conclusion yet. Especially when parts of the eye haven't even been in the radar coverage zone fully. It'll be something to monitor over the next hour or two, though, as the storm fully enters the radar coverage zone and gets out of that gap.
Yeah, so it's definitely not a gap in the eye wall, as someone suggested there. It is a radar. I don't know if it's a glitch, or for some reason a part of the radar scope there is missing. So we are assuming that the rest of the eye wall is there on the southeastern side.
Yeah, I mean, if there's indication from reconnaissance aircraft, it might be a weaker eye wall. There's no hurricane force winds on that eye wall from the latest data that we got from the recon pass about an hour or so ago. But it could still be a solid eye wall, bringing significant wind and rainfall alongside it.
What's the most impressive storm structure that you've seen in a tropical cyclone? Asks Twitch Juco.
I think some of us are more time period biased because, we haven't been as in the nit-grit about tropical cyclone history as you have, per se.
Oh, me? Well, I'm not massive with radar archives, it has to be said.
Yeah, and I feel like it's kind of more important to talk about Douglas.
It
right?
quite is, but that was a question. Fun Plus Smart wants to know if we still have human moderation in the chat, Strat. I leave that to you and Jason and other people on the team. What's going on over there? A lot of people complaining about the night bot.
I do my best to respond to questions and comments there, but it's difficult to do that and be commentating at the same time and going through imagery and questions and making posts on other social mediums. But we do our best with it. I think we have quite a few actual just moderators for the YouTube chat, although we could always look to add more in the future, I presume.
Now you'll get loads of requests from people saying, I want to be one. Anyway, we're also joined by Tim, who's showing, well, I don't think he's actually speaking, but he's showing this imagery of the storm as well. That's another view of the radar, the oranges and the yellows right around the eye there. It looks like it is a full eye, but as you can see again, that radar glitch, it's cut off, so it appears that the eye isn't complete when it most likely is.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a wait and see, at least on the radar imagery, for probably the next 30 minutes to an hour or so as that continues to move into frame. Because compare this to Hannah, which we were tracking live yesterday, this storm is moving about double the speed. It's moving 16 miles an hour right now, while Hannah was moving about 8 or so during our coverage. So developments with this are going to occur quicker. Conditions will probably deteriorate faster as well at some places. I know we have Preston's got that live feed up on southwestern Maui, facing out towards the southwestern side at points. We'll be keeping track of it for sure.
Yep, here it is on the infrared imagery again. Latest frames, my observations on the satellite imagery here would suggest that the convection is starting to decrease, and the northeastern side, it would appear that there is some kind of gap in the upper levels, so there could be some dry air entrainment. Oh, there's some webcams that we're not looking at. You can take a look at them if you want. Over there, and there is this imagery as well, where the northeastern side again doesn't look, well, hard to tell still at this point, but it would suggest that the upper levels, that the that the storm might be struggling a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the weaker it gets now, the better, really. So if it can kind of buck the trend of staying stronger than expectations and start a bit of a more intense downtrend, that would be very beneficial to land areas.
Well, will it? Because usually stronger storms tend to pivot further north, and if it does weaken, it might have more of a reason to go south and west.
That's true. It can be a double-edged sword at
It
times.
can be.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, you can make the argument that the reason it's getting closer to the islands now is because it got so much stronger than initial expectations had for it days ago, which allowed it to push further north. But at the same time,
It's
it
quite
weakening now
at this point. It's quite hard to discount that the eye's growing on the radar.
yeah, that's true. As that southeastern eye wall comes into frame, it looks a bit larger and larger than what we're
It's
seeing.
almost double its original size.
Yeah, I mean, it's much more palpable on the northeastern side, which looks to be widening, and the northern part as well, having significant banding and strength of rain bands around it as well. So, I mean, we're gonna have to wait fully for that southeastern eye wall to come in, but definitely a potential bigger eye structure than we were seeing at the start of the stream only 45 minutes ago.
As for its movement, that sort of clouds it up a little bit, but it would look like, and it only looks like, I'm not sure whether it is yet, that it's moving northwest now. If that's true, that's excellent news, because that would be steering slightly away from the islands.
Yeah.
I have to agree with you on it. I do feel like it's going northwest. And that's also what the models were suggesting would happen as well. So it's a good thing, because that means it's not going to make a major impact on those lower islands, especially the Maui in that area.
If it continues that way, of course, storms can do the strangest things, and it could just turn west again, and that means that the western side of Maui would still have probably some significant problems. The eastern side, it almost in the clear, but it's still not. It's still too early to say that yet.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the radar imagery, it really gives a clear scope of just how close the stronger impacts from the hurricane are from coming on shore. Really, any significant jog to the west would start to bring those really heavier rain bands over parts of Maui. Again, for people that weren't here earlier, someone was here before the stream saying, what's going on? I'm in Maui. I'm not seeing anything. Using that radar imagery, you can see it's really close to having those stronger impacts offshore coming inland. And when the conditions deteriorate, they go down really fast.
The yellows and the reds are very close to the coast there.
Yeah, and we can draw an example in coverage with it, even with Hannah yesterday. Places we're seeing much weaker impacts earlier in the day. Isaac in Corpus Christi, for example, we had his webcam. Things were able to turn downhill in terms of the ferocity of conditions that a hurricane is bringing to a landmass very quickly when it gets very close to land, and those eye walls and those stronger bands of convection and rainfall and winds are able to push on shore.
Well, if you've got any comments or questions for us whilst we're on the air, please send them in, because it's very important to get your thoughts and hopefully answer some questions if there are any. Start your message with Force 13 all in text in the chat section. Let's see, what else do we have right now? What are the chances of it not making landfall? Well,
Which island are they talking about, though, is the thing? Or are they just talking about the storm as a whole?
Yeah.
Because that's where it really differs,
Moderate. Some models don't have a landfall at all, but that, and this is where people sometimes think, oh, it's not going to make landfall, so I can go out and do whatever. Whereas actually, tropical storm force conditions are very likely on all of the islands. But the good news is that hurricane conditions are slowly becoming less likely on at least Maui, but we'll still have to wait and see for Oahu and further west.
I mean, they say it's better to be safe than sorry. And especially in these kinds of systems, it's better to be hunkered down than to be walking in the street.
Yeah, and that especially goes to the point of how conditions can deteriorate very quickly. So if you're watching this right now, please be responsible and safe. And if your preparations are complete, stay indoors. If they aren't, and conditions are still not bad, where you are, finish them immediately and stay indoors. And if there's any evacuation orders for your exact location, listen to local officials for information on those so you can stay safe for yourself and your family.
For a lot of
Uh,
people, I think it's going to be rain, 15 inches, maybe more in some places, and that's if the storm goes further south. The thing is, if the storm does decide that it's going to go northwest and miss the islands, right? You're talking about less than 2 inches of rain across the whole island chain, and everyone there will feel like that was a waste of a hurricane warning, but it's very close between having 2 inches of rain and barely tropical storm force winds and having 10 and 15 inches of rain along with 90-mile-an-hour sustained winds.
Yeah, and that minor discrepancy is why it really is always better to be safe than sorry. You know, seeing the radar imagery on the screen right now and seeing how close those stronger bands are to coming onshore in Maui right now is the prime example of that, really. Someone's asking a question, actually. I think it's a bit useful to go over really quickly. Does the radar imagery suggest impact by wind shear, or is the storm being impacted by shear? I'm not sure if anyone has an easily available graphic on it, but
That's easier to check on satellite.
yeah, that's true.
And looking at satellite, I'm not seeing that much of it. Maybe on the extreme eastern periphery.
Yeah, the northeastern side's under much stronger shear than the actual center and southern sides. It's really teetering on the edge of moderate to light shear that wouldn't be too destructive to the storm, and significantly higher shear to the north of it.
How common are hurricanes around Hawaii? Probably have to be a little bit more specific with that question, because there can be storms that are around Hawaii quite often, but they have turned on their hurricane shield so many times in the past, seen so many storms that have been supposed to make landfall there or get very close or deliver hurricane force winds over the last few years. The biggest recent example was Lane, which got very close, but it just turned round and weakened rapidly. It didn't make landfall, but it was still produced enormous amounts of rainfall. And there have been several other examples, but on some occasions the islands do get hit by hurricane force storms. Although there's only been actually 2 hurricane landfalls, I believe. At least in the last 60 years.
Correct. But, you know, regardless of that, that doesn't discount the danger these storms can bring to land, even if they don't actually make a landfall. You know, Lane is really a great example of that, because even though it turned away, fortunately, and the strongest winds remained offshore, an absolutely enormous amount of rainfall was wrung out from that system over land. I think it was upwards of 50 inches in some places. You know, and when tropical cyclones are wrenching out that level of rain in a relatively short time frame, that's a massive flooding risk. So never discount these storms, even if the worst impacts in terms of winds are staying a bit offshore.
A question there, what island will be most affected?
Again, it really just depends on where the storm goes. Like, if it continues going west, then it would probably be Maui. But if it goes how the models predict, more northwest, then it'd be some of those Honolulu kind of area.
If the models are right, it will probably be Kauai, but when are models ever right?
Yeah, that's true. I think, that is true. If the storm moves a bit more westerly in the very near future, Maui could get hit really hard. Otherwise, though, you know, Oahu and Kauai need to be keeping a very close eye on the exact track that this takes over the next 12 to 24 hours. You know, we talked about when's the possible closest approach to land for the storm. You know, for Maui County, we're looking at about 2 p.m. the local time there today as potential closest approach. So that's about 5 hours or so off from now, now that we're looking at it. And then 12 hours after that would be one of the closest approaches to Kauai. So that's about 2 a.m., really. So a lot of the overnight hours are when this could be making some of its closest approach to land areas at this point in time. So especially if you're not directly on Maui right now and some of the islands that aren't seeing significant impacts this morning, make sure you're completing your preparations immediately for the storm in case it decides that it wants to take a bit more of a southerly track and make a direct landfall instead of staying barely offshore or scraping along the coastline, because regardless, the exact location. It's a very dangerous storm, and it's much better to be prepared than not prepared for a system like this.
All right. So the latest hurricane warning in effect for Maui, Oahu, and Kauai counties. Tropical storm warning for Hawaii County. You can see at the bottom of your screen there. And I imagine that might be lifted pretty soon because it's becoming increasingly clear that the Big Island isn't going to get any further tropical storm force winds if there have been lately. The next update from National Hurricane Center, Central Pacific Hurricane Center, will be at 11 a.m. and then we'll see if they've changed any of the warnings by that point. But at the moment, it does still appear that the storm is at least paralleling the islands to the north with clearance of, well, I'm trying to figure out that distance, at least a few dozen miles. Let's try and get a distance on that. About 45, 50 miles off the coast of Maui there.
Yeah, it is, pretty close to land in reality, really. Those worst impacts are really hovering very close to the shore right now. And about the Big Island as well, they could potentially discontinue some of the warnings for parts of it at the next update in about 2 hours. But considering the situation there right now, still some impacts on the northern part of the Big Island. I wouldn't be surprised if they wait at least another 5 hours before they really begin to wind down some of the warnings that are currently in place.
Yeah, it does appear on the satellite imagery, though, that the Big Island's only really getting high clouds at this time.
Yep. And a bit of an update on reconnaissance aircraft. They are about to head through the eye from the northeastern side, and they did get peak flight level winds of around 90 knots in the northeastern quadrant, SFMRs of around 70 or so, but it hasn't made a full pass yet, so that isn't full data at this moment in time. And at the next update, we'll probably get a hint at what the southwestern side of the storm is looking like, and that's the side closest to land right now, so it's going to be very important to see the exact wind speeds that are happening on that side of the system as well.
Well, with Ike's screen right now showing another view, do we know where that is?
It's in Kahana, Hawaii, facing east.
Okay, so again, another cloudy picture there, but doesn't look like too much is going on at that location. Certainly no signs of surge just yet, it would seem. Tide getting just a little bit higher there, but obviously I don't know what the normals are at that particular spot. But breezy, not a huge amount of wind there just yet, and the worst effects of the storm are still well offshore. The yellows there on the radar and the oranges and reds still drawing ever closer to the eastern half of Maui, and the north coast there could get significant rainfall in just could be half an hour or less, and Kahului perhaps shortly could get some rainfall action as well.
Yep. And someone in the chat actually said that they're in Kahala right now, so I'm hoping that they're seeing this, and if that's the actual conditions outside there right now with Ike's webcam, that their preparations are as near complete or fully complete already, and that they're staying as safe as possible right now.
And I at least apologize in advance because it's been a while since we covered a Hawaiian storm and our geography is very, very rusty. So we're relearning all of the locations again. But there we are, looking out towards the hurricane on Preston's screen right now.
Yeah, I can get the exact location of Kahala as well, just for a reference point. That is actually near Honolulu, if I'm not mistaken. So it's much further out from the actual center of the storm right now. So for that area, closer to...
So that was on Oahu, is it?
Yeah, so that's going to be
So
closer to 12 to 18 hours to the closest approach from the hurricane right now.
Already clouded over there, though, which was interesting.
Yeah, conditions for that area are generally just going to continue to decrease as we get closer and closer to the closest approach from the storm. So hopefully the person there is staying as safe as they possibly can right now, and that their preparations are as near complete as they possibly can be this morning.
Okay. Movement does still appear to be either west-northwest or northwest. So if that does continue, that's really good news if it's true. But again, that rain band getting very close to Maui, and that would be the only island getting significant impacts shortly. And it does look like, considering there's still a gap in that radar on the right-hand side, that the very northern tip of the big island is probably getting a little bit of action there as well. So we still think that there is, I mean, that the more this goes on, that eye is getting bigger and bigger, and will look a bit silly if there's no other side to it and it's just half an eye.
I mean, it's technically possible that there's a gap there because, recon data was showing no hurricane force sustained winds on that southeastern quadrant, but they were still showing stronger winds up to 60 knots on SFMR. And an update from that reconnaissance plane, it just flew through the center on the northwestern or northeastern side, heading to the southwest side now. Minimum pressure in the eye of about 983.9 millibars.
So
give or take a tiny bit. So it's not really looking to be weakening too much more at the moment in terms of pressure rising. They'll take a drop zone and they'll probably get a very similar number to the last one, which was 988, if I'm not mistaken.
987 on that they went with.
Yeah, so they went with 987 on the update. The last drop zone in got 988. So they'll probably have a similar reading right now. So the storm isn't really weakening much right now, potentially.
What you can see, though, is that most of the rain envelope of the storm is on the northern side, so that's good news, and that was always going to be the case. The strongest winds will be on the northern side, so the southern side of the storm is weaker, although still potentially hurricane force. But the way it's looking right now, you're seeing it on the satellite as well now, actually. There's been a northwest jog. So that is potentially very good news, but not confirmation that this storm is going to miss, because it just as easily could jog back south again. So we've got to be very careful what we say. We don't want to give people a sense of a false sense of relief when the storm hasn't fully passed, but it's almost getting to that stage. It's just done a little jog northwest, and that might spare Maui from hurricane force winds.
I saw someone in chat ask if this storm is currently stable.
Stable in what way?
I don't know.
With in intensity, it looks to potentially not really be weakening much right now.
Yeah.
I guess if that's what they're asking in terms of the strength trends, it could be that.
And do send your reports in as well, like Samantha has. I live on the east side of Maui right now. There's steady rainfall and no wind yet. Those reports across the islands are very helpful, not just for us to figure out what's going on, but as we distribute that information, it may also help other people around those areas too. So do keep those reports coming in. And people are saying they're going to do live streams and videos from their place. Well, as long as you do it safely.
Yeah, if you're considering trying to capture anything live, it's probably best to just set up a webcam if you're not already in inclement conditions now, and just leave it there, rolling a feed. Or do what Isaac did yesterday, and you can just have it inside at a window pointing outside, really.
Yeah.
If you really want to capture what's going on, that's always a good way to do it, and staying safe at the same time as well.
And if you have good imagery and you're safe, we'd be willing to show some of your coverage of how the conditions are.
Yeah, I mean, there's a plethora of ways to reach us if you really want to share some of the direct conditions at your location. You can tag us on Twitter, send us a message on Facebook. Our Discord server is available if you really want to post things there and tag some of us. We'd be more than happy to share what some of our viewers are going through right now as well.
Which for most areas isn't a huge lot just yet. but that yellow creeps closer and closer to the shoreline. Let's just get a proper zoom in on that. So that's how close it's getting on the northeastern coast of Maui right now. So places like Waialua and also further south towards Hana there could get some of those yellows shortly, and by shortly we're talking about something like 20 minutes at this rate that the more intense rainfall might begin.
Yeah, and with that's probably going to be some stronger sustained winds too, although I really want to wait and see what the reconnaissance aircraft's saying about the southwestern side of the storm to see how strong those winds are exactly. But, that's where you could potentially start to see tropical storm force winds if the wind field's large enough to really bring those in as well. So if you're especially in northeast Maui, please make sure your preparations are already complete and that you're staying safe right now. And there's an interesting question as well, asking if there's a state of emergency. To clarify, there was a disaster declaration or an emergency declaration declared yesterday for the state of Hawaii in preparation for the storm, just for people to be clarified over that.
I was too busy looking at Hannah to see that.
Well, do we want to take a brief view at some of the other active systems right now, or at least areas of interest? Because I know we're talking a lot about this storm, but there are a couple other things going on.
Well, again, there's the Atlantic, and a lot of people asked about Invest 92L earlier. We are watching it. It is that area of rotation on the eastern side of the tropical Atlantic. It's a very high chance of formation in the next 5 days. National Hurricane Center giving it 90%. So it's 9 out of 10 chance right there. Not very often they do that. Most models think that it will become a significant tropical cyclone and could give hurricane impacts potentially to the Lesser Antilles and beyond. So that's something to really watch out for, and that could be our 9th tropical storm in the Atlantic so early in the season. By this point, on average, we're at about 2. Looking in the Gulf of Mexico, you can see what's left of Hana. It's still a tropical storm at 40 miles per hour, just diving further southwest there into Mexico off the shot, probably delivering very large amounts of rainfall over the hills and mountains there, and we've seen plenty of flash flooding in the area. The Eastern Pacific wide shot, you can see the whole basin here, not much going on apart from Douglas, and Douglas itself isn't the largest system in the world, but it is large enough to cause significant impacts on some of the islands. They usually tend to shrink a little bit by the time they get up there. And to be honest, a lot of Eastern Pacific storms aren't really the largest. They're much larger over in the Western Pacific. And for those who are interested, we can show you that. That's the Western Pacific. I think that's live. Let me just confirm. Yep, that's current. So not much happening there, but there could be developments later on in the week. That's about it, really. Not really any point looking elsewhere around the world because nothing's going on there.
In the meantime, though, I can actually screen share something because someone is asking for microwave imagery of the storm. Douglas, to get some of the
That'll be useful.
Look at the core. So I have this microwave imagery. The latest frame on it is 1845 UTC, which is quite recent. You can see it approach Maui. Or get a close approach to the island right now. It is looking like that southeastern eye wall is going to be the weakest.
That's quite telling.
Yeah, so I mean, we might end up seeing a gap. I have the reconnaissance data in here that I'm, waiting, refreshing to see. This is the latest pass of it. They're getting pressures down to about 984 millibars at flight level, which does correlate to about what they're saying, 987 or 988 near the surface. But I really want to see if there's hurricane force winds on that southwestern quadrant, because if there is, this storm is more threatening, at least in terms of wind impacts potentially for parts of the Hawaiian Islands than it would be otherwise.
The southwestern quadrant is very close.
Yeah, and we are looking at, this microwave imagery at least, that southwestern eye wall looking potentially to be the most intense part of the storm in terms of its eye wall structure at the moment as well.
So the big question of the hour then is, what actually is happening on the southeastern side of the storm's eye? Is there even an eye wall there? Well, The more time goes by, the less likely it's becoming, looking at this imagery. Surely it's about to appear onto the range any time, but we've been here over an hour.
Yeah, I mean, it might end up being that there's some sort of gap there. And that would be telling. The storm is really not as strong as it might otherwise be, considered if it had a full eye wall all the way around. Although, notably, the western eye wall in general, the northwestern and southwest, are looking quite vigorous.
So what were the strongest winds that they found in the northeastern eye wall?
The strongest winds with flight level were about 90 knots of flight level winds, and SFMR readings around 70 knots or so, a little higher than 70 knots sustained. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if they keep this at 80 knots regardless, though.
Well, they've done that all the time so far, so...
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly
if they
because
went and did it
the
again.
prior pass was potentially showing some flight level winds a bit higher than that, at least on the northwestern quadrant on the SFMR readings. And Recon is updating now. No hurricane force flight level winds on the southwestern quadrant, but
Oh,
they are
wow.
picking up SFMRs of close to 70 knots on that quadrant regardless.
Wow.
So, interesting discrepancy that you don't really see too often. If they talk about that in the forecast discussion at their full update, to say whether or not they think there's hurricane force winds on the southwestern side
So
of the
what does
storm,
that mean in layman's terms?
It means that the estimate tool that they use to derive what surface winds are higher than the actual flight level winds that the plane was recording in the southwestern quadrant. Usually you don't see that because winds are supposed to be higher further up in the atmosphere than they are at the surface level. Typically the estimates will be 5 to 10 knots lower at the surface than they are at flight level. But this is an interesting discrepancy that we're going to have to see how it plays out.
You can keep sending questions in. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. Tornado Freak has done that to ask a question about Hannah and whether it was affected by the brown ocean effect.
As someone that I made a video update on it last night as well, so I think I could talk about this briefly. It really wasn't. As soon as the storm moved inland, it started to weaken. It's really picked up the pace of weakening and losing organization. I guess some people are asking that because the eye feature of Hannah became more visible on satellite imagery after it moved inland, or as it was moving inland. But if you really delve into the finer details and aren't really taking a very plain surface look at what the actual strength of the storm was, the pressure of it, it was definitely weakening at that point in time and has continued to do so since.
So this is live coverage of Hurricane Douglas, which is closing in on the Hawaiian Islands. The next update from the National Hurricane Center will be at 11 o'clock this morning. The latest as of 8 a.m. from them is that dangerous Hurricane Douglas is closing in on the Hawaiian Islands. Well, that's stating the obvious, I think. 90-mile-an-hour winds they had, a pressure of 987 millibars, moving west-northwest at 16 miles per hour. So that movement appears to be continuing, still west-northwest at this time. The big burning questions right now are, does it have a southeastern eye wall? Why is that question important? If it does, then it may be intensifying again or have the chance to very shortly. If it doesn't, then perhaps it could still be on a weakening trend. And the other big question is it still moving west-northwest? Because if it is, and if it does continue to move west-northwest, it will, the center of the storm at least, will miss the islands. But we can't bet on that just yet.
And someone's asking a question. I think it's valid to go over, and I think I'll actually ask them for a bit of an extension on it. They're saying, as a newbie to storms, could you give me a simple overview of it and any tips related? Well, I think we gave a basic overview of the storm, but if you're talking about tips, if you could really specify more what you're looking for in that regard, that'd be pretty helpful for us to really explain what.
Oh, we lost our feed for a short moment there. Do continue, Strat.
I was just going to say, someone's asking a question about the overview of the storm. I think we really just went over that But if
Yep, we did.
they're also asking for tips, so you might need to specify a bit more so we can really get the best information in that regard to you about what you're really looking for. I do think we can go over the latest watches and warnings that are currently in place, though, because I know we haven't done that for a while, and there's a lot of new people coming in and out
Yeah,
all the
go
time.
ahead.
So currently, right now, we have a hurricane warning in effect for Maui County, including the islands of Maui, Lanai, Molokai, and Kahului. There's also a hurricane warning in place for Oahu and Kauai County, including the islands of Kauai and Niihau. There's also a tropical storm warning in effect for Hawaii County, and a tropical storm watch is in effect for portions of the Marine National Monument from Nihoa to the French frigate shoals of Mara Reef. I'm not going to try to pronounce the exact name of that monument because I know it will completely butcher it. But that's the area where watches and warnings are currently in place with the system.
Yep, sorry about that. I was just caught away for a moment there. Let's see if we've got any further questions then. There was a question about why hasn't the Bahamas system been noted by the National Hurricane Center? Conditions are favorable and the system looks good. Strad, have you seen it?
Let me see if I can find it really quick, just with some satellite imagery. It's a general area. I mean, are they talking about? If they're talking about just north of the Bahamas,
Yeah, there is a little spinny
Right
thing
now.
there.
I mean, I would presume they're expecting that it just, it isn't. It's still pretty broad, just by taking a very brief look at it, and that it isn't going to have time to really organize into a tropical cyclone of any kind before it encounters more unfavorable conditions. That would be my best assumption based on the brief satellite loop that you're able to see on screen right now.
You just
north.
never know when some of these things might just develop because it Bertha.
I mean, although to be
Said.
fair, we not only do we have Bertha this year, which is a very statistically unlikely event to occur. It was 10%. It was right on shore and it spun up at the last second, similar to Emily of a couple of years ago. But then we also had Edward, which was not even on any models or on the NHC forecast map and managed to literally develop out of nowhere. So, strange things do happen. I'm just assuming that they don't really see this having a chance to develop before it enters more hostile conditions.
All right.
And a clarification on the question someone was asking, we use the radar imagery a lot, so I think it's good to talk about it as well. They're wondering, on tips of how to read radar imagery of storms a bit better to see what they're really doing. I know we've been using radar a lot, and that you're really good with that.
I'm not actually really good with that. This is just the reflectivity, and basically the yellows are moderately significant rainfall, and the reds are the pretty bad stuff. That's all you really need to know. I'm not I'm not a massive radar expert. I'm just showing the imagery. Ethan and maybe Preston and some of the other people will be able to shed more light on the science behind it. But effectively, the greens are light, the yellow is moderate to heavy, and the red is very heavy.
I mean, if you want really, I guess, a description of the best way to use it to ascertain, a hurricane structure, really, if part of the eye wall is, missing any greens at all.
Well, yeah, if you're talking about hurricane structure, I know a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we were talking about that a little bit, just to ascertain, how a storm's performing, really.
Well, yeah, you obviously want to see a closed eye wall. It's the same for satellite as well as radar, but radar usually shows eyes in weaker storms like this one. It's not a Category 5 or anything. It is still a significant hurricane, though. And you can see the eye clearly on this radar imagery, waiting for the rest of it to come through, whether that's southeastern side, what colours we'll see. But if you get a strong yellow band all the way around, then that's a pretty intense cyclone, and red's obviously very intense. But if it's just greens on that southeastern side or nothing at all, then you've got an open eye, and that is a sign of weakness, definitely.
Yep. Totally. And I'm just going to see if Recon has an update again. They're actually flying along the coastline of the Big Island right now. So those tropical storm force winds, at least at flight level, are pretty close to Maui right now, potentially just offshore, really. The SFMR readings are indicative of Also, potential tropical storm force winds at the surface being very close to the shore at the moment for the island of Maui as well. So, when that strong yellow or orange band on this radar imagery moves on shore, that's when you could potentially start to see tropical storm conditions coming on shore in Maui as well. So, if you're watching that, us, and you're there right now, make sure that you are doing absolutely everything you can to stay safe from the system, and do not go outside, because even if, like someone said before the stream about 2 hours ago, I was in Maui. Why am I not seeing anything yet? Conditions will deteriorate very quickly, most likely.
There might be evidence of that now on the radar because some of the yellows are starting to overlap the land there. So locations in the far eastern tip of the island, roughly, areas around Hana, maybe just towards the northwest, around the airport area, could be getting significant rainfall right now.
Yeah, very true. So, I mean, we're really just got to watch that. Since we started the stream, really, those yellows and the stronger rain bands and potentially tropical storm force winds have, really crawled closer to the shore, and we could potentially start impacting parts of eastern Maui in the very near future.
But looking at this, I mean, I'm starting to get a little bit more optimistic that this west-northwestward movement is going to continue. Because that means that the hurricane force winds are most likely going to miss Maui. Still can't confirm that that's going to happen just yet, but unless it does want to do a last-minute dive towards the southwest, at its current movement, hurricane force winds will end up missing. Beyond there, obviously, you go up to Oahu, and you can see there that's still open for debate. The storm could still do anything there, and even at its current direction, it will probably get closer to Oahu than it would from Maui.
Yeah, I mean, regardless, very close call ongoing for all of them right now.
All of them, absolutely.
And I know there's a good chunk of people here watching, so if you have any questions that you want us specifically to answer, it helps the conversation go. It gives us more things to talk about and give information about as well. Start your question with @Force13 in text, or just the words Force13 in text. It lights up your message in a nice orange for us. It makes it easier for us to see what you're curious about, what you want to know, and allows us to give you that information.
And just to remind everyone again, from the radar site, there is a gap in the coverage. I'll try and draw some lines. Here, round a little wedge up to there, that is a radar outage. So it's not that there's nothing there, it's that the radar isn't operating in that little wedge area. So there could be heavy showers in that zone all the way up to land, for all we know. And what I've just noticed there is another bit of showers popping out just west of the Big Island. So if that flares up, then the Big Island might be in for some rainfall as well.
Yep, definitely going to have to end up keeping an eye on that in the future, because the radar with that gap there, we're kind of stuck with more infrared and other satellite imagery that can kind of tell us where the heaviest cloud tops are, and some of them may be skimming parts of the northern Big Island right now.
Let's take a look at the satellite again. Go ahead.
Yeah, I should say, notably on the infrared at least, part of that heavier bands that could be trying to get near the Big Island are starting to pull away a little bit as well, at least in the latest frame. So it's going to be a very close call for the coastal areas of the northern Big Island in terms of whether or not they're going to get stronger impacts from rain and wind, at the moment at least.
But clearly those on the northeastern shorelines will have the most cause for concern right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's go back to Ike's screen right now as well. Ike, any further thoughts?
Waves are getting higher by the time the hurricane makes landfall.
Up to 3 feet of storm surge is predicted, of course, yes. You asked a question in the chat earlier, didn't you?
Yeah.
About when it's going to make landfall.
Yes.
That's the question that I'd love to be able to tell everyone the answer to, but I don't really know myself, because if the storm continues to move past Maui, then It's not going to make landfall there, so that eliminates the chance of a landfall in the next 3 or 4 hours. So you'd be looking then to one of the other islands, and that will be many more hours. You'll be looking towards Molokai, perhaps, if it decides it wants to veer towards the west, but more likely you'll be looking closer towards Oahu, and that's still several hours away. And given that it's moving out how fast, about 16 miles per hour, it is still 160 miles from Oahu, so that's 10 hours right there.
And I was looking at the radar, and it looks like the radar can finally is starting to show a little bit of the final bit of the eye wall that currently was seen in the radar blip. So it does look like there are some showers that are pretty intense on that side as well.
I'm not quite seeing it here just yet, but I'll take your word for it.
It's not fully in yet. You can't see the full southeastern eye wall clear. So we're getting pretty close. Probably in the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be able to see most of that southeastern eye wall exit the radar gap and become much more visible.
Does Douglas have a chance for intensification or not? Is a question there.
We talked about it earlier, and you've been keeping track of the environmental conditions, but the sea surface temperatures would hypothetically support it if it can get into an area of a bit lower wind shear. It's really on the line between moderate and lower shear and higher shear.
Conditions are very marginal, but we can't rule out slight intensification by 5 or 10 miles an hour.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at that western eye wall, most of the western half of it on that radar imagery very robust right now, so it's not a weak storm by any means.
Yes, some interesting questions coming in there. Can it become a Category 1 250 mile an hour super typhoon with a pressure of -4 millibars and a CDPS rating of 23? No, it can't do
That's
that.
a joke.
I kind of doubt it. I have to be honest with you guys.
That'd be pretty incredible. Someone's asking a question about some of the impacts, though. How big are the storm surges going to be from this system? I think the latest was maximum about 3 feet right now.
That's what the National
not
Hurricane
mistaken.
Center advisory said.
Yeah, so they're expecting up to 3 feet of storm surge and inundation along some shore coastal areas. I'm pretty sure they'd be saying northern parts of these Hawaiian islands.
Yep. Let's go back to the radar. Let's see if we've still got that webcam up.
Strat, do you have any update on the recon currently?
No, it's not really updated. It probably will come in soon, though. The recon plane is about to parallel the big island of Hawaii, getting SFMR readings of about 25 to 30 knots offshore there right now. Tropical storm force winds, according to the SFMR readings and flight level wind data taken from the recon plane, are very close to northeastern Maui right now, so they could be coming onshore in the near future if the current trend continues. And someone's asking a question if this is a Category 1 or tropical storm. It is a Category 1 hurricane right now with maximum winds of 90 miles an hour at the latest update.
Yep.
So unfortunately, it's stronger than what initial expectations had laid out for it a few days ago, and is currently a strong Category 1 hurricane.
So this is the big island right now, and I assume this is looking towards a northerly direction, and it looks like that's the hurricane in the far distance, the darker clouds over the water. But as you can see on the big island, which is only how far away from the storm center, must only be about, let's see, 80 miles or so. Extremely calm.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about it before, and it's going to be true for most of the islands that this gets close to impacting. Conditions will look not too bad shortly before the impacts start, and will likely deteriorate very quickly as the harsher impacts and the center of the storm makes its closest approach to you. So don't take the time period you have right now for granted if you haven't completed your preparations yet for the system. Make sure you're fully prepared and safe and ready to handle this storm, because when things head downhill, they'll head downhill very fast. We talked about this a bit yesterday with Hannah too. Isaac was on stream. He's in Corpus Christi and had a live webcam showing a lot of the time. and things weren't too bad for him in the morning, but in parts of our afternoon stream, things got pretty bad there very quickly for him. So make sure if you're not in Maui right now, and you're further up the island chain, that if you're not finished preparing, take advantage of the time you have right now to complete those preparations as fast as you can. Yeah, and someone else asked a question. I think someone else here can answer it. If Douglas makes a landfall, is there a tornado threat from the system in Hawaii?
Ooh.
I mean, in the area it is, there's a chance, but I doubt it'll be like that bad.
Yeah, I mean, Hawaii isn't particularly flat, so it's harder for tornadoes to really get on the ground in the first place.
And I would imagine more tornadoes, if there are any, and waterspouts would be on the northern side of the storm.
Yeah, that's also true. But, tornadoes already happen pretty rarely, if ever, in Hawaii. They're not very common at all. So the risk is technically there, but it wouldn't be particularly notable. But it's always an extra threat that you have to stay prepared for when you're talking about a tropical cyclone coming very close to land.
Yes, there's a report. Wailuku, Maui has light winds and light drizzle at the moment.
Yep, and for people that want to have that on the map, that's on the northwestern part of Maui. So not as close to where tropical storm force winds might be beginning to come on shore near the eastern and northeastern tips of the island. But conditions will continue to deteriorate there over the next several hours. So thank you for giving us that update, and make sure that you're staying safe.
Yep, and we encourage everyone else to send in reports as well if you are on the islands to give us the latest information. It looks like most areas won't be getting anything too significant right now, but there's some significant bands of rain literally just lying in wait off Maui on the northeastern side there. Kahului as well might start to get some of that in the coming hours. It might be 2 or 3 hours before that rain band decides whether it's actually coming or not, or they might just get away with it and without that significant rainfall. We'll see. But at the moment the storm is still moving north of west, which is very good news because the National Hurricane Center were going with more of a westerly route and landfalls at one point over the eastern islands, but that hasn't come to fruition, and we're hoping that the trend is to stay continuously north, and so the storm would miss all of the islands, at least with direct impacts, hurricane impacts. As it is right now, tropical storm force winds can't be that far offshore. It does look like they are still offshore, though. From all the webcams we've seen, there's hardly been much going on.
If you have any questions, do give it to us at Force13, all in text.
Yep. And just an update on reconnaissance aircraft as well. They're paralleling the Big Island of Hawaii now on the northeastern side of it. Tropical storm force winds not impacting them right now. They're seeing maximum sustained winds of around 20 to 25 knots, up to 30 possible based on the SFMR readings and flight level wind data coming in from the storm right now.
Now
so
you
the
can
Big Island might be dodging.
Sorry.
I was just going to say the Big Island is probably dodging the worst conditions in terms of tropical storm force sustained winds and heavier rainfall, fortunately. So,
yes.
I mean, we talked a bit earlier if they might discontinue warnings for at least part of the island at the next update, which is about an hour and a half from now. It's possible now, really, if things continue to improve, because if you look at the satellite loop and see the trend, it looks like the storm might have already made its closest approach.
We'll talk about that in just a moment, but I just want to point out this imagery from Oahu, from Ike's camera there. So that's a small area of cloud that's passed over the area. They're not coming out into the clear by any means. There's been a bit of cloudiness on the periphery of the storm that just passed over Oahu in the last hour or two. So there's some blue sky there, and then there's going to be more cloud cover on this camera. As we get later in the day, it will start to get darker here, particularly in the afternoon. So not much going on at that location, as you'd expect. A little bit of a breeze. The hurricane is still around 160 miles from this location.
Yeah, and another update from the western side of Maui. They're saying that Kahului Harbor is looking more cloudy right now, and that it's starting to rain in, I think it's Waluku right now. So conditions definitely starting to head downhill for the island of Maui right now.
Wailuku, yeah, just west of Kahului. Not much rain on the radar, but there are little bits going through there. Intermittent showers, it would appear. The main band, the steady band of rain, is still offshore.
Yeah, and that is fortunate for the time being.
So, on to your point before, and see if we can try and prove that. With regards to the storm moving further away, certainly looks that way when you're talking about movement away from the big island. See if we can try and reconstruct a track there, and it's heading on that way, so it looks like a west-northwest heading. At that point it still might be moving a little bit closer to the island of Maui, and of course the storm could still decide to turn towards the west, and then it would be making a beeline for Oahu, or it could continue going on its merry way towards the northwest and only affect the islands in a minor way, as we can see on that chart there. It doesn't look like it's going to go any further north than that second track that I've just drawn, and it doesn't look like it will go any further south than the first track, so I guess that's your cone of uncertainty right there, and if it went through the centre of it, then you'd be looking at tropical storm force winds there on Oahu.
Yep.
Somebody asked how long we're going to be doing this stream for.
That is something that we're playing by ear.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can jump to another radar loop, see if we've got anything more interesting. Oh, well, that one's got a that one's got a gap because of the island there, right where the centre of the storm is. That's not working out so well.
Oh wow, that is.
Let's try the big island view again. Oh, we're already on that one. Yep.
Another report coming in from a viewer saying that the trees just stopped moving again in Kahului, near the mountains overlooking them in the airport in the region. So thank you for that as well. So Kahului is just on the edge of having conditions really start to deteriorate, it seems. An interesting question as well. I think we could talk it a little bit because we mentioned it at the very start of the stream, but there's a lot more people now, and a lot more people are always flowing in and out. Someone's asking if this system will survive into the Western Pacific, and the current forecast calls for it to survive as a tropical storm into the Western Pacific Basin, and if nothing forms by about day 4, which is borderline right now. A couple of computer models try to develop something in the Philippines about that time frame, but there's no full agreement on it. If it survives to the Western Pacific and nothing else forms there, Hurricane Douglas would be the next named system in the Western Pacific Basin.
Stop it.
The 1st of July.
Stop
It's
that.
not like this storm will be very intense in the Western Pacific, however. It's probably just going to die out like from a day after it enters.
No, conditions are going to be very hostile once it enters the Western Pacific. It really should deteriorate, likely within 48 hours after entering that basin at most. Although it's at the very end of the forecast cone. Really?
That ice clearing out on satellite, by the way.
It's possible.
On visible it is. On infrared, it looks like dry air. And the convection continues to overall decrease. Anyway, I was going to go to the models because we can show them as well here. This is the initialization of the GFS model. The yellows on the northern side of the eye there, that's hurricane force conditions. And if okay, that's gone over there now. If we probe it, you can zoom in and get the number. That's in knots, so it's going with 82 knots on the initialization. That's around 95 miles per hour. And then as we go through time, let's see where it ends up. So the GFS takes it on that northwesterly course, which it is currently doing, clear of Oahu, and then rather close to Kauai, and weakens rather quickly there. No longer a hurricane by that point. That's on the GFS model, and that is that's 18 hours from now, or maybe 15 hours. So that's overnight tonight. And then off it goes towards the western reaches, towards the international date line, dies off, barely a tropical storm at that point, and there it is by the end of day 4, losing tropical storm status, crossing the international date line, which is somewhere around there, trying to get my bearings, and into the Western Pacific, and what's left of it will die off and drift off towards the north. What you'll have happening actually is the track of the storm taking us just over the islands according to the GFS model, over here to where it is at that point. And then it will drift up towards the Western Pacific and get caught up in a front, and then what energy's left in that storm will get transported all the way back towards British Columbia. That's where it'll end up going in the end, although all the energy, it won't be completely belonging to Douglas. But that's the long and short of it, if you're intrigued about its future track.
Yeah, and I think we're joined by Isaac right now as well. He's showing some radar imagery.
Isaac?
Hello. I'm here.
Now, Isaac knows all about these things right now because you were in Hurricane Hannah yesterday, and it's the first time we've had time to catch up on that. So what's the situation at your place?
Well, pretty much about the same amount of I went and did a little damage assessment here over in my area, and the damage is pretty much roughly the same as it was in Harvey. I will say, though, that I'm noting a lot more tree and kind of flora and fauna damage than I am with structural damage over here. Just I'm seeing like really minor structural damage, like just tiny parts of the siding on people's homes missing, and not much really other than that. But I'm seeing a lot more tree damage. I'm seeing just a lot of leaves on the ground, small twigs, and I'm seeing some, I guess, up to moderately sized tree branches just scattered all around my area that are down on the ground. Thankfully, none of them are on the road, and if they were on the road, they probably pushed them off of the road so people could get in and get out of my area. But other than that, pretty much about it. My power flickered a little bit, but never got out, thankfully. However, some of my friends are still without power, and some places have been without power since about 8 in the morning yesterday, my time. And I believe at maximum, I think the maximum number of power outages in Corpus was, I think, 45 or 46,000. And I think now that's gone down. And I think now that's gone down to like 40 or 40,000 or in the high 30s now, last I checked.
So you're talking about probably a good third of the city that lost power there yesterday.
Pretty much. I know at Harvey was a lot worse. Pretty much about half the city lost power with Harvey.
Because we had this clarification. Nelson was really good at providing this last night. When they say 30 to 40,000, customers, usually that's households, and the average person in a household is about 2 to 3 typically. So to see how many people really lost power, you got to really up that number a bit.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the updated outages thing now, and now it's all the way down to 31,000 without power.
Yeah, so I mean that's still close to 80,000 to 100,000 people still without power. That's still a lot for that city.
Yeah, their city is roughly has a population of roughly 325,000.
Yeah.
Somebody in chat asked, which one is more dangerous, Hannah or Douglas?
Well, right now it's Douglas because Hannah's dying.
Yeah.
But if you're comparing it to Hannah at peak, then I would say Hannah.
Yeah. Although to be fair, it really is apples to oranges comparisons. All cyclones.
It is because Hannah was enormous and Hannah was hitting a completely different part of the world.
Yeah. Plus, having a gauge between the two, isn't always the best, really, because both of them are life-threatening regardless of their size or the exact intensities and such. So having one storm potentially be a bit more of an overall threat than another shouldn't really discount the threat that the other one's bringing to life and property.
Yeah, agreed. They're both just as dangerous. Like, there's two that could be equally as dangerous. We shouldn't be focusing on one. I mean, we should be focusing on helping the people in both different areas.
So, Isaac, you're looking at the radar right now in any case. What are your observations of Douglas today?
Well, the eye has held up quite well. Usually when storms go over to the Hawaiian Islands, they either dissipate due to wind shear, or by the time they get to the islands, they're pretty much gone due to sea surface temperatures. But that's not happening with Douglas at this point in time, because I haven't checked shear just yet, but I imagine it's probably good enough. if the storm's not being able to get ripped apart by it. Sea surface temperatures are great for it right now. It's just a waiting game on whether or not it makes landfall on the Hawaiian Islands or not. And this is a pretty rare situation here. If the eye wall does happen to make it onto land of the Hawaiian Islands here, it'll be the first time since 1982 with Hurricane Iniki. For those of you who remember Iniki on the Hawaiian Islands, since Hawaii got hit by an eye wall of a hurricane. So quite a bit amount of time since the last hurricane here.
Now, Isaac,
so definitely a serious situation.
Some other questions that obviously we've been observing, but just to get your opinion in there as well. Its movement right now, west-northwest, it would appear. It doesn't look like it's getting any closer to Maui. Would you agree with that?
I'm not too familiar with the Hawaiian geography here.
It's the one on the right.
What island would that be on? One on the right. Yeah, it's pretty much probably about its closest approach here. I think the main islands that are going to be affected are the people on Honolulu and Kauai here. Or I think that's what it's called, Hawaii Island on the far left side
Yes.
there.
It's off our shot, but yes, it is. And also, we're just looking at that gap in the radar, and it's been very annoying to us today. But on the eastern and southeastern side there, do you think we're going to see a complete eye wall, or is it actually looking like that? Is there a gap?
Well, I haven't been able to look at recon data, just like impromptu put this up here, but it wouldn't surprise me if there is a gap in the eye wall there. So.
I mean, it is quite a weak storm. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, considering what it used to be, it's still quite dangerous.
Well, of course, this storm did peak as a Category 4 a few days ago in the open East Pacific, and many storms do that. Nothing uncommon about that at all. It would be uncommon if we didn't have one in a year at least. But it's tracked beyond that. And do you remember towards the beginning of Douglas's life that we were sort of being a little bit flippant on its chances of getting to Hawaii? But here it is, it's verified, and we've still got a Category 1 right next to the Hawaiian Islands, where sea surface temperatures are a little bit warmer, and there could still be an opportunity for the storm to just a little bit get a second peak there.
I mean, I don't think it was really unfair of us to been a bit pessimistic.
Well, of course not.
It was, initially when the storm first formed, it was forecast to be either a tropical storm or dissipated at this latitude and pass overall, well to the south of Hawaii. So, time periods changed. The storm was stronger than forecast. Forecast tracks had to shift north to compensate and create a match with it. So I wouldn't say it was unfair, but overall, it really has overshot expectations per se.
Well, if you've got any questions for us or reports on the ground in Hawaii, if it's safe to do so, please start your message with Force 13 all in text, and we can relay all of that information. What's the wind field of Douglas right now?
I can get the initialization of that from the forecast advisory, if I'm not mistaken. The initial wind field for tropical
I'm already
storm...
there. So it's 90 nautical miles in the northeast quadrant, so that's around 105 miles. Southeast, around 70 miles. Southwest, it's about 45 miles. So by that logic, if it's true, tropical storm force winds are still offshore because it's 47 to 50 miles. Very close call, though. And on the northwestern quadrant, it's around 105 miles as well. So as it is right now, if the National Hurricane Center are right, there aren't any tropical storm force winds. I think it's right to say that the eye's been growing because it's reminding me literally of what Hannah did, because that eye appeared to grow and then it started to appear more on the visible imagery, and lo and behold, we load up the visible imagery now and you'll see that the eye is starting to clear out. Yeah,
unfortunately, as this storm moves into the Hawaiian Islands, the sea surface temperatures increase as it gets closer, unfortunately. And last I saw, wind shear wasn't an issue at all. Actually, wind shear was moving away from Hurricane Douglas. So the two main things that usually weaken storms when they get to Hawaiian Islands are not present with this storm, unfortunately.
Yeah, and
someone gave a report.
Yeah, it's another on-the-ground report
from the east side?
From Macau. It's about central eastern Maui. They're saying that they are starting to get some steady rain, but no winds quite yet.
as well.
Yeah.
Someone in Lahaina, they said, I think that's how you pronounce it, but they said that there's barely any wind. There's nothing on that, right? Just rain.
Certainly no surprise that there's more rain there. Just trying to get this radar back up and running. We'll get there in a moment. Let's switch back to the satellite. Let's get that infrared once again just to see how it's been looking in those latest frames. Again, it looked like on the visible that the eye's coming out more, but on infrared it's less than impressive.
Yeah, I mean, there might be an argument, especially once we get the full radar view, that southeastern eye wall, there's some more dry air coming into the system than it being really the eye fully clearing out. We're seeing a bit of a slot opening up potentially, but it's still kind of a wait and see as we really see this kind of verify over the next couple hours. Recon's still finding, obviously, a Category 1 hurricane, although if they don't find some 80 knot SFMR soon, those are the extrapolation of flight level winds down to surface level strength winds. If they might have to downgrade it slightly to 85 miles an hour to match the 75 knot SFMR readings, which are much more consistent with the storm right now.
Yep, just getting this radar back onto our screen. So here it is once again, and you can see there, well, actually, you know what? Look at those latest frames. The massive yellow and orange and red band on the western side is really fragmenting and dying off in those latest frames. What's with that?
Wow. That's pretty decent weakening.
But regardless of that, though, still some of those yellows starting to move onshore in far eastern Maui right now.
There is.
And someone's asking, what are the chances of landfall of this storm? It really depends on if you're talking about Maui or Oahu and Kauai. They're probably decreasing in odds of landfall for Maui at this point. If the storm keeps its trend of going more west-northwest than making a turn towards the due west point.
It's almost at its closest point to Maui, and after that, when the closest point has been reached, that we can say, we can't quite say all clear, but we can say it's not going to get any worse. It's currently 50 miles, the center of the eye, 50 miles from the closest point on the coast, and they estimate that the winds go out 45, so it's really close.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very close call for some of the harshest conditions from Hurricane Douglas, whether or not they end up coming fully onshore for the island of Maui or end up staying just offshore. Notably, though, at least, if you use the infrared, just see where the tallest cloud tops are. Some reaching minus 60 degrees and closer to minus 70s, trying to creep onshore the eastern part of the island right now. So we're going to have to watch and see if that trend really continues. Someone that has, I don't know if they've been here before, they're asking what the color frame means. I think they're talking about the color designation of the radar, Nathan.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's quite simplistic, but the greens there, fairly light rain showers. The yellows, when they come in, you'll be noticing getting it significantly more heavy. The red stuff is potentially destructive. I tell you what we could also look at, if I can find it, would be... Nope, I've lost it. What we could see if we could do here is get some precipitation totals, though, and see what we come up with.
Yep.
So there you go. You can see that rain creeping in now, and that's in the last... how long? So there was no rain until that point in time, which was just over an hour ago, an hour and 20 minutes. To this point here, where the rain has really increased. Let's see what numbers we've got. Where's the 2-inch threshold? Over there. So just over 1 inch of rainfall has fallen on the very eastern tip there in the last hour and a half. So that's the amount of rain rates we're getting at the minute. The yellow and orange must be half an inch, I would imagine. Let's see if we've got a better look. I'm just trying different sorts out. Not much going on with that one.
That's a really short time frame. A lot of that's really only occurred, really in part of the time that we've been live covering the storm right now. So, pretty significant rain range from the system.
All saying different things. But there we go. Whilst I play with all those graphics, I've not looked at those ones that often. So, but rainfall is increasing on the eastern tip of Maui right now, definitely.
And an update on the aircraft recon as well. Finished paralleling the northeastern coast of the Big Island of Hawaii, getting sustained winds there between 20 and 25 miles an hour, mostly, barely 30 per tiny bit. And they're looking like they're going to take another pass at the eye from the southeastern quadrant going to the northwestern quadrant.
All right, I think this one's better. So the light greens there, when it goes towards turquoise there in the middle, that's some really heavy rain rates of 1 inch per hour. That's 25 millimeters per hour, and even higher in that small little area of sort of purplish color there, right in the middle of it. So that higher rain rates are on the way for the coast of Maui. So if it's already heavy there at the moment, it's going to get heavier very shortly.
Yeah, and for the people who are actually there, it's best to just stay in place, stay at home, and keep an eye on what's going on, especially in your areas.
I mean, especially if you're in far eastern Maui, your preparation should already be complete at this time. You should be indoors, or if you're in a very low-lying area, if your local officials ordered some sort of evacuation or extra preparation, you should have taken that at this point. Do not go outside in these very stormy conditions, since it's not safe. For people more central and western Maui, your preparation should also be done at this point. So make sure that you're doing everything you can to stay safe. And then for Oahu and Kauai, they have a bit more time. You should be using those precious hours that you have this morning, really, to finish any preparations immediately and do everything you can to just stay as safe as possible. This is a very dangerous storm. It is a Category 1 hurricane that could make a very close approach or landfall on parts of Hawaii within the next 24 hours. And those impacts definitely being felt on parts of eastern Maui now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and someone said it really perfectly, to stay home off the roads, that they wouldn't want to be in areas prone to flooding and mudslides. Yeah, like,
Definitely.
Even
Even in places like the contiguous United States, a lot of injuries and fatalities occur from vehicle accidents in tropical cyclones.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before.
That's without the mudslides.
Yeah, and we're talking about in much more mountainous area, talking about Hawaii in general. Once you get inland a bit, compared to where Hannah was yesterday, making landfall, much more generally flat landmass. So mudslides are definitely another risk that you're going to have to keep an eye out for when you get those really heavy rain rates in a short time frame. So it's definitely right to say to stay off the roads during this. I know back earlier this month when Faye making to the Northeast, we saw that live cam of all those people just driving around in the Northeast. Don't do that when you're facing a storm like this, please.
Exactly.
And this is a rare hurricane for the Hawaiian Islands too. The Hawaiian Islands are not usually prone. Well, they are prone to getting hurricanes, but usually they get sideswiped by hurricanes. And they usually don't get hit by the eye wall of hurricanes here. And this seems to be the case this year. This time with the Hurricane Douglas, they're looking likely to get hit by at least the eye wall of Hurricane Douglas here. If there's any fairly good news about Douglas, is that it's moving fast as compared to Hannah. Hannah was pretty much kind of slowing down the landfall. This one is moving fast. I don't know if it's going to be increasing over time as it passes the Hawaiian Islands, but it is moving at a fairly decent rate of speed, and doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon from what I've seen on the National Hurricane Center, Central Pacific Hurricane Center cone.
And the period of your loop there, Isaac, what's that, about 4 hours?
500 frames, and it starts, starts at about 15 UTC to now.
4.5 hours there.
Nice.
So it's made quite a lot of progress in that time.
And that kind of leads to someone asking, how many days will Douglas last around the Hawaiian Islands? Fortunately, because it moved pretty quickly.
That's pessimistic. It's not going to be days, thankfully.
Thankfully, yeah. The worst impacts might have already been felt on parts of the Big Island. The storm.
It's past the Big Island now.
Yeah.
Easily.
Just outer bands can still lick the northern coast of that island, though. Maui is probably going to see the worst of it for the next up to 12 hours at most.
At most.
And
I think the closest point to Maui will be reached in the next hour.
and
It's not going to make
Oahu,
landfall there now, I can tell you that much.
which is very fortunate. Oahu and Kauai will probably see their closest approach to the storm. Notably, they aren't actually seeing storm force conditions yet, and not tons of rainfall yet. Most of the bands are offshore those islands at this point in time. But within the next 12 to 18 hours, they'll see their closest approach from the storm. And really, by day 2.5, this should be cleared out of all the Hawaiian Islands. Actually, by 2 p.m. local time for Hawaii on Monday, which is about a little over 24 hours from now, close to 30 hours, the center of the storm should be significantly past the main Hawaiian island chain, and conditions should be generally improving for them within the next 24 hours as well. It's fortunately moving pretty quickly.
And not just that, there's also the islands of, I think it's Oahu, I forgot the name. But those islands are going to get felt, I think, within the next day, but depending on how close it gets, those impacts won't be too severe. Or as severe as they could be.
Look at this, though. This is the map projection radar without any... just looking at it squarely, so there's no optical illusions. The storm is now at the same latitude as Oahu, so if it was going to make landfall there now, it would have to move due west, exactly. And the way it's been going, I don't think it's going to do that. So at this point, it's looking more likely than not that it won't make a direct landfall on Oahu. It's still got a little bit further to go before we can say the same for Kauai. But all I'm saying here is that the chances of a direct landfall on Oahu now are probably less than 50%, but it could still happen, and indeed the eye wall could still reach the island as well and give hurricane force winds.
So again, as we've been saying multiple times, it's best just to be prepared. If you are in those areas, it's best that you're in your home and you have preparations.
Yep, especially if you're not in Maui, if you're at that point, everything should be complete by now, especially if you're in the eastern part of that island. But Oahu and Kauai have a bit more time, but everything should be completed in terms of preparation for the storm within the next 2 to 3 hours at most, as the morning comes to an end in Hawaii. And Tropical Bum is giving a really good message as well, not just staying prepared, but be sure to stay safe as well.
Exactly.
Let's see. If there is any other questions that you want us to answer, though, while we're live right now, start your messages at Force13 all in text, or just the words Force13. Lights up in a bright orange for us, allows us to answer whatever you're curious about, keeps the conversation flowing. Someone is telling us an update from, I think it's Waluku in Maui, which is about the northern coast, a bit further on the western side of the island. They're telling us right now that there's some gust of winds and rain and some light rain, but still relatively calm for that part of Maui at the moment. Conditions there should likely start to deteriorate more quickly over the next hour or two, though.
And you can see very calm conditions on the island of Hawaii now, as has always been the case, really. But you can see the hurricane clouds in the distance there. Interesting to look at. But in terms of the big island, it looks like this storm is going to be heading out of there if it hasn't already.
Somebody asked if Douglas could pass the international date line and become a typhoon.
It's forecast to move past the international date line as a very weak tropical storm or tropical depression right now. It won't re-strengthen there, though. The conditions at where in the Western Pacific it's heading are far too hostile, and it's universally projected in models that this system will, very shortly after crossing the international date line, die off and be, I think, as you said earlier, Nathan, when you pointed out, be absorbed by some sort of frontal low system instead.
Yeah, an extratropical low, I would assume, and what's left of its energy will be dragged all the way over back towards the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, so fortunately, we're not looking at a extreme threat in the Western Pacific way down the line from this storm.
More questions. Has there ever been a hurricane landfall in Hawaii from the east?
Gazelle 2014 came really close, but weakened just before landfall.
Hickey was close.
There's some close approaches. Usually, we see them come over from the Eastern Pacific, though, and then make their close approach that way. So the last couple of years we've had, numerous storms make close approaches to the Hawaiian Islands in such a way. We had, Olivia, Lane, Hector got close, but didn't actually give conditions.
Olivia was a poor excuse of a storm.
That's true. But it still existed in technicality.
It certainly did. Just watching the radar imagery again.
Some people have been asking about the disturbances in the Atlantic.
Now, just a minute. Before we go any further, I'd just like to say conclusively, it looks at this point that we can conclude. Look at this. Draw a circle around here. That is the eye wall right there. And as you can see, on the eastern side, southeastern side, we have nothing. So that is a massive dry slot quite clearly there on the southeastern side.
That is a very nice thing to see with this storm. It doesn't discount its current intensity at all, but it'll likely make any potential brief re-intensification significantly less likely unless it manages to completely flush that out of its system. So I mean,
that is good news. It's not got a full eye wall. It seems, I'm almost certain in saying that. If there is anything, then half of another eye wall will be over there on the far right hand side, but I'm not even seeing that much. So it does look like the eye is open. Satellite imagery suggested that at the higher levels, and now it looks like the radar's saying that at the lower levels. And look at infrared, and it's not really much of a surprise looking at that. Visible, let's see what we can see on there now. You can see the eye, and yeah, it might even be completely open on the eastern side. So at this stage, what are recon finding?
Let me get you the latest on that real quick.
Because if we don't have any observations from them, it's got to go down in intensity now.
Yeah. I mean, the maximum SFMR readings they were getting were about 75 knots too in the northern side of the storm. So, I mean, that's not indicative of 90 miles an hour sustained winds. That's more 85 miles an hour, which is still a moderate to upper end Category 1 hurricane, still a significant threat to land. They are flying in from the southeastern side right now. Within the next 20 minutes, we'll get an eye pass from the southeast to the northwest. So we'll get a sample of the potentially fragmented southeastern eye wall and the stronger northwestern eye wall to get some more information on how strong the system actually is right now again. I mean, if that really keeps up, though, very fortunate. It's going to make any re-intensification significantly more difficult and could potentially end up leading to some sort of downtrend a bit more sooner than we were anticipating as well.
How far is the hurricane from Oahu right now? It's roughly 150 miles away. It's about 50 miles from the nearest point on Maui. And the National Hurricane Center estimate that the tropical storm force wind's radius extends out towards the southwest at 45 miles. So very close for comfort for Maui with regards to tropical storm conditions. From the reports we've had so far, not many people have been talking about wind. They've been talking more about rain.
Yeah, that's really been the consensus so far. We've had a good amount of people in chat relaying some of the information of their experiences on Maui right now, and thank you for that. A lot of them have been in the central to western part, though, so the strongest winds that might be occurring on Hawaii in Maui right now are probably in that far eastern side. So there could be stronger winds near tropical storm force onshore or very near shore right now, based on the data that we got from reconnaissance aircraft about an hour ago before they paralleled the Big Island. But within the next 20 minutes, we'll probably get a bit of a clearer picture of how close those winds may end up being towards northern Maui right now.
This is Force 13 Live. We'll have more information from the National Hurricane Center at the end of this hour. That would be 11 o'clock in Hawaii. We'll probably finish up after that because we'll be running back with more video updates on our YouTube channel. But we felt the need to go live to give you the latest information. I would imagine things might get a little bit repetitive after the end of the hour. So we'll wait for the National Hurricane Center's update. Apparently recon getting, what, 989, did I read?
Yeah, the last drop zone was 989 millibars. So that's a discrepancy of about 5 millibars or so from the flight level pressure and the actual ground pressure. So the storm is still getting a bit weaker in terms of pressure compared to the last intermediate advisory from the National Hurricane Center when we first went live. That's an increase of 2 millibars in pressure. So it's going to be interesting to see if that weakening trend is continuing when we get the next pass from recon aircraft, likely within the next 20 minutes or so.
And I think it was mentioned a bit ago, but I think, could we just do like a quick mention of the Atlantic? Just
Of course, no one's going to let it be secret for too long, because there it is, Invest 92L, with some rotation there, a broad system in the Eastern Atlantic, and it will probably get pretty, could get strong over the next few days. Forecast models suggesting anywhere from a tropical storm landfall in Dominican Republic to a major hurricane in the Western Atlantic next week. We can't say really what it's going to do just yet, but there it is, its early phases of its life, and the Atlantic really staying hot. That would be the 9th storm if it decides to form, and it looks like it will, where the average in the Atlantic at this point of the season is 2.
Yep, so we're about 4 times ahead in named storms. Fortunately, at least in terms of accumulated cyclone energy, ACE, most of these storms have been pretty weak. Hannah was the first hurricane of the season, despite it the 8th named storm. And the past 2 storms, Gonzalo and Hannah, were actually the first storms to originate from main development region systems. Beforehand, all the systems were either coming from the subtropics as prior non-tropical systems becoming tropical, or in the case of Cristobal, crossing over from the Eastern Pacific as the remnants of another tropical storm. So we're really starting to see the main development region of the Atlantic Basin start to heat up as we continue on and get closer towards the peak of the season, which is really about a month and a half away now.
Yes, it is. Let's see, any more questions there at this point? Well, if you do have any, please send them in, and your observations. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. We'll get an update from the Central Pacific Hurricane Center at the end of this hour. I can't see how it would still be 90 miles an hour with a pressure of 989.
I mean, pass on recon to see the northwestern side, which looks potentially to be the strongest eye wall, unless they somehow get 80 knot SFMR readings, but they haven't been for the last 2 passes. It's probably only 85 miles an hour now. And someone is saying, an important question for us to go over really quick, when's it hitting Oahu right now is what they're asking. So I know we've been talking a lot about Maui because that's the landmass that's impacting the most right now. But Oahu...
Something like 9 hours at this rate.
Yeah, it's around 9 hours to when you're going to see much more severe impacts coming in there. But if you are there right now, make sure your preparations are getting completed within the next 2 to 3 hours at most, because when conditions start to head downhill with the storm, they will head downhill very quickly.
That's if the storm gets close enough.
That's true, but it's always important to stay ahead of the game, especially when the system's already giving impact to the island right next to you right now. Even if it doesn't end up making a landfall or have the eye wall come ashore or stay a bit offshore, heavier rains and still probably some significant wind gusts and sustained winds will likely be impacting Oahu. So definitely stay on guard.
Just trying to figure out whether it's reached its closest point. It's about to, if it isn't right now. So, unless it just decides it's going to turn west on a dime right now and steam through Molokai and Oahu, then it looks like it's just about making its closest approach to Maui right now.
Yeah, I think, that sounds about right for the center of the storm based on what we're seeing right now. The stronger bands, though, are starting to spread a bit more inland to central and western Maui rather than staying just isolated to the eastern part of the island, though. So we're going to have to monitor that closely through the rest of the stream today.
Somebody a little bit ago asked what the category of the storm is, and I feel like it's important to say that it's a Category 1 storm.
Yeah, it's actually on the bottom bar right now, so that's good timing to say that. Category 1, the latest update at 2 p.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Hawaiian time, had maximum winds of 90 miles an hour. That's a Category 1 hurricane. The next update, the full advisory from the National Hurricane Center is due within the next 45 or 46 minutes. They likely will come out a little bit earlier than that, though. Based on the recon data coming in from hurricane hunters in the storm, it's likely that they go down a little bit to 85 miles an hour based on the 75 knot SFMR readings that we're getting. Although I will say, right now, the recon gave an update. It's about to pass through the southeastern eye wall, which is the one that looks much more fragmented on your screen right now.
Or maybe invisible.
Yeah, they're actually picking up hurricanes in that eye wall when they were not doing so earlier, at least at flight level. They're picking up flight level hurricane force winds in the southeastern quadrant, which is something they were not doing earlier. So that's a pretty interesting right now, at least. We're really going to have to be at least another 10 or 15 minutes before we get the full update and get the eye pass, see what the lowest flight level pressure is, and what the winds are really starting to look like on the northwestern quadrant of the storm, which, at least on the imagery right now, is probably the strongest eye wall quadrant at the moment.
Someone was asking before about how will southern Oahu fare compared to the northern side?
Better. I mean, not going to get
well, that much is clear.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a west and east almost with this system right now, because the western side has overall a lot more colder cloud tops reaching up higher in the atmosphere, generally heavier rainfall, it seems, and likely stronger winds than much of the eastern side of the storm, at least on the southeastern or southwestern side. The northeastern quadrant of the storm still has hurricane force winds at the surface near or about what the northwestern side is based on the latest pass that we got on that quadrant.
Of course, we'll get updates from the National Hurricane Center on Tropical Storm Hannah as well, whether it's down to a tropical depression or not at the next update, which is coming up in half an hour, just over half an hour. But of course, Douglas is now the biggest feature. If you missed Hannah, it made landfall in the in southern Texas yesterday as a Category 1 storm with winds of 90 miles per hour, same intensity as Douglas right now. It's still a tropical storm inland over Mexico, moving further inland. And then you've got that other area of interest. Someone also asked earlier about whether there's nothing forming in the eastern Pacific in the next 5 days. It doesn't look like there will be. The only thing I've spotted on the models is that long range there might be some more hurricanes, but one, you would expect that in the eastern Pacific in August, and two, that is long range and about as useful as flipping a coin.
Recon just made a center pass in Hurricane Douglas, and the lowest pressure they found so far in this pass is 984.3 millibars, and the highest winds so far in this latest pass is the highest SFMR winds are 69 knots.
Wow.
So you'd be sticking with probably a 987 or 988, and I'd drop the winds.
Yeah, I mean, is that a full pass of the northeast or the northwestern eye wall yet, or are they just partially through it right now?
Well, they went through the eye. Now they're getting into the strongest winds of that eye wall, but the highest winds they've seen so far in this newest pass is 69 knots, SFMR, non-suspect, and then the lowest pressure, of course, was 984.3 millibars.
Yeah. So we'll probably have to wait another 10 minutes or so before we get the full data on what the full strongest winds are, if they haven't encountered those already on the northwestern eye wall. But it does look like the storm is at least potentially, or quite likely now, a little bit weaker than it was when we started streaming a little over 2 hours ago, but that really doesn't diminish its land threat at all.
As I've been saying multiple times, if you're in the area, you should be prepared for this system, and you should be at your house safe.
If
Yeah,
you've just joined
someone
us,
asked me-
this is looking out from the Big Island. I think it's northwest or somewhere like that. Clouds associated with the storm in the distance there, but rather calm on the Big Island. Looking back towards, well, there's the radar once again, but you can see on Ike's webcam, partly cloudy skies in eastern Oahu, but more cloudiness will occur very soon as the storm draws nearer. It is still 160 miles away.
Yeah,
Straight.
and someone's asking a question. I know we've gone over it a few times, but there's always new people coming in and out. Do we know what a time approximately the system is expected to impact Oahu and Kauai the worst? At the start, and just to give perspective, based on the latest National Hurricane Center cone, for at least Kauai, the closest approach will be at about 12Z time, which is about 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning,
And it will
which will
make
be about
its
2 a.m. Hawaiian time about.
closest pass to Oahu will be overnight, late evening.
So, make sure that all your preparations are done today ahead of time for this, because it is highly possible that you might be asleep when the worst conditions from this storm will arrive. You don't want to wake up and be underprepared and be in a situation that you really shouldn't be in just because of a lack of preparation. Someone said this earlier, and it's important to note, at least with a hurricane of this strength, most sturdy buildings, like most households, would be fine from winds, but it is very important to make sure that anything loose you have outdoors that could be a flight risk as possible debris is tied down, just in case significantly stronger winds that you might end up expecting come on shore. They could lift those up and cause significant damage to either a piece of property or potentially another person. So make sure you're prepared in that regard. Make sure all those household items that are outdoors and are potentially a debris risk are either inside or tied down in a safe manner.
There's a view from Molokai. Again, there is a gap there, and that is artificial. That is probably due to the land in the way of the radar scope there. Yes, it looks like. So that gap there is literally just because the radar station can't see through the land. So the hurricane isn't cut in half, but
It's not a hurricane sandwich.
the northern side is much clearer on this imagery, and you can see it's quite potent on that northwestern side. I just thought I'd show that for a moment or two.
Yeah. And someone asked a question. I think we can talk about this really quick. Asking if he believes that convection is rapidly diminishing in the northwestern quadrant because of the potential dry slot that's causing a likely gap in that southeastern eye wall. I mean,
The
if you take
answer
a look
is
at
I don't think it is diminishing because the
The latest
radar
frame is blown up.
it's getting out of range.
Yeah, and also I just note on the latest frames on the infrared imagery, those cloud tops on the western side of the eye are really trying to maintain themselves. They're not really dying off fully. On the eastern side, things are getting, looks to be, if you can pull up some infrared just to really talk about it, continuously less strong. But the western part of the storm is really trying to pull through right now.
What is it doing?
It looks more, it's honestly looking less and less, symmetrical, really.
Well, clearly.
Interesting.
Especially with how the strongest convection is significantly displaced
It's
to
got a
the
handle
south and
right
west.
now.
It almost looks like an upside down comma, to tell you the truth.
Yes.
Is that just it getting sheared?
I mean, there is some, it's really, if we have any wind shear
Must be
graphics to show,
sheer on the eastern side, or
it's really teetering on the line of weaker shear.
unless it's huge amounts of dry air.
I mean, I don't know if we can get any water vapor imagery that could really clear that up somewhat. But
I
I saw some
personally
shear
can't.
graphics earlier,
I
and
can get it.
it's pretty close to teetering on the edge of much harsher shear to the north, which you can kind of see causing some of the convection there to split off a bit, and lighter shear in the south of the storm. So it's really playing a game on the edge right now in that regard. I'm going to see if I can get us some water vapor imagery just so we can see if there's really any dry air becoming a significant inhibitor for this right now. It is possible. Yeah, other than the storm itself,
I got it
really,
up on my thing real
a
quick.
significant dry air around it right now. All around it, actually, other than the actual system itself, is just dry air completely.
Sorry, Como, it's still not working over here for me, I'm afraid. But I'm curious as to what Nelson might be showing us right now. Nelson, have you got any comments on this?
I do. These are wind velocities from the Molokai radar, which is the one that has the land gap, as you can see. What I've done is I've set the color tables so that the purples are winds below tropical storm force, and of course this is all from radar. The blues are tropical storm force winds, green are Category 1 hurricane winds, yellow Category 2 hurricane winds. Now, as I always
Is that
say when
wind
we're
gusts,
working with
Nelson?
radar, it's whatever the radar's measuring. So if you see the brighter colors pop out and then go away, it's likely a gust, but some of those blues are going to be sustained type winds. Now, and again, you've got to remember that these yellows here on the northwestern side of where the eye is, they're at approximately 10,000 feet in altitude. So those are closer
yes.
to the flight level winds that the hurricane hunters are going to see. But it does show that, you know, the tropical storm force winds, if you look down towards Maui, you can see them just off the coast. And I'm actually going to change the radar location back to the Big Island. And again, now these, you can see the blues. You don't see anything up in the northwest anymore because it's simply too far away. And you see very few of the greens there. But you see these tropical storm force winds right here just skirting the coast of Maui. And again, these are at about 4,000 feet. So it's not surface level winds, but it does a good job to show you where these wind fields are. Gusts in Kahului right now, 29 knots is the biggest gust they've measured recently.
That's
But
at
again,
the weather
this
station,
just gives
is it?
you an yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
And this just gives you an idea of where these tropical storm force winds could be. And right now, they are just skirting that northeastern coast of Maui.
Okay, so that's very interesting to see, and I think it tallies in a little bit with what people have been saying. The winds have been getting up a little bit, but not a huge amount, and that rain's been the biggest factor, and quite often they come together anyway. So,
Yep.
Strat?
I was just going to say, I have this satellite imagery of the water vapor that I'm about to screen share for a second, because I know we were talking about, you know, are we seeing a potential dry slot really becoming a much more significant factor? And really,
Actually, Strat, just as you say that, I've got Codemo's imagery here now.
Oh, perfect.
It works.
You'll see the same thing probably, just that outside the actual storm itself, there's no significant moisture in the region other than the actual tropical cyclone at this point.
Yes, especially to the west and southwest there, the storm is fighting to push its moisture plume out towards the west there. It's got to be weakening at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it is entirely possible, and I really want to see the National Hurricane Center's forecast discussion when it comes out, likely in under 30 minutes now, if we're getting some sort of update from them on what they're looking at with the potential dry air intrusion on this eastern side, really. And also an update, they're actually doing hourly position updates on the storm now.
Oh, are they?
Yep, so the 10 a.m. update
When did they do that?
from about 30 minutes ago, still at 90 miles an hour, 97 saying that it was closing in on the Hawaiian Islands, and that it's saying that it's being tracked by multiple radar sources as it moves
Here's
westward
the
by the
kicker
east
right
side.
now, Strat. They say that they've observed Douglas experiencing southerly vertical wind shear. So that sounds like it's struggling a little bit.
I mean, not surprisingly, it's in an area that's slightly more harsh than it's where it was previously.
Yeah, I mean, we've said it a few times, and it's really teetering on the edge of moderate wind shear and heavier wind shear. And as it, right now, if it were, say, a couple hundred miles further south, it'd be a much lighter wind shear than it is now. and that southerly shear is definitely going to be having some sort of impact on it as we see it start to really degrade in symmetry and how well it's looking on satellite appearance, at least compared to 12 hours ago. The radar, though, still shows a pretty decent western eye, although in those latest frames, maybe a bit of a gap forming between the eye wall and actual more rain bands of the system, if you see that.
Again,
Going back to the wind.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, just quickly going back to the winds here. Yeah, the storm is entering an area, as of the last winds here update, of about 20-25 knots of winds here, which is of course not really the best when it comes to sustaining a Category 1 hurricane. Nathan?
I was just going to point out that you can continue to send any questions and comments in by starting your message with Force 13 all in text. We're here for at least another half hour discussing Hurricane Douglas as it continues to move west-northwest. It looks like now it's just made its closest pass to Maui. Isaac, would you agree with that?
Pretty much at this point. I mean, for the eastern part of Maui, western part, it's not quite, probably not quite there yet, but definitely they're probably seeing about the worst right about now in terms of effects. They're probably getting some rain bands from it, and then some probably some gusty wind from it, but thankfully they look like they're not going to be getting into the eye wall of Hurricane Douglas at this point.
And in my, I was just looking at the imagery of the water vapor on my screen, and I'm noticing in the last frame how particularly in some parts of the system, a lot of the moisture is starting to dissipate a little.
Yeah, that eastern side in particular is really struggling a lot now. The western side, particularly the southwestern quadrant, is still flaring up a lot of higher cloud tops, and that's sometimes indicative of stronger convection. But every other quadrant of the system, other than that now, is really starting to struggle quite a bit more than it was earlier today. And an update on recon as well. They got to pass through the northwestern sector of the storm now. Strongest flight level winds around 90 knots, but SFMRs on that path only hit 70, really. So this potentially, I wouldn't be surprised at all at the upcoming full advisory within the next 30 minutes, they downgrade this to 85 miles an hour based on the data that we're seeing right now.
As soon as the update comes out, we'll let you know. Anytime within the next half hour, because sometimes it can be a half hour early, the National Hurricane Center. So as soon as it comes out, you'll know.
Yep.
And if you're still on the island, it's best to still be cautious, even though this thing is starting to degrade a little bit. It should still be looked upon with a cautious eye.
Yeah, I mean, tropical storms, even at their strength, can still provide very life-threatening conditions, especially when we're talking about some of the most severe impacts being heavy rainfall totals. Those kind of totals in short time frames, once you get up to, an inch plus an hour, can be very dangerous, regardless of the exact wind speeds, not only of the storm, but are also of what are occurring over land. So don't discount the potential threat that this system brings to land to Maui right now, or to Oahu or Kauai in the next several hours, just because it may not be as strong as it was yesterday, per se. Always keep in mind that this is a life-threatening storm, regardless of its exact intensity that we're seeing right now. And we have an update from someone in chat right now from Waluku in Maui, saying that there's light wind gusts with mild rain on and off and still relatively calm for the time being there. So, I mean, that's fortunate to see that, at least for that part of Maui, we're looking at much more calmer conditions than we're probably seeing on the very eastern tip of the island right now.
And again, there's just some webcam views that we've been going through. I don't think we've got any on Maui at the moment, but this is from Hawaii, the big island, and the other one that you saw just before was on the east coast of Oahu. Both of these locations aren't seeing very much, and I would imagine the conditions on the coast of Maui right now are borderline tropical storm force winds, tropical storm force gusts, definitely, maybe up to 50 or 60 miles an hour, and moderate to heavy rainfall, not quite torrential, but pretty significant rainfall. Probably not a huge amount of surge, because the 3 feet that we've been speaking about is at the center of the storm. So only if it makes landfall will you get the full 3 feet. And we've got news now that Hannah has weakened to a tropical depression. So we're really pleased about that. Hannah is much weaker now. No warnings in effect. Interests in northeastern Mexico should monitor the progress of Hannah still. For storm information specific to your area, please monitor products issued by your National Meteorological Service. 25.6 north, 100.6 west. And that's moving west-southwest at 9 miles an hour, pressure 1002. That's the last advisory from the National Hurricane Center as well. So they've finished up with Hannah, and pretty soon that will be taken off their overview.
Yeah, and just to clarify something as well for Douglas, because I saw this in the chat, we're in no way saying there's going to be zero impact to Oahu at all. This is still a very dangerous storm, and the forecast, kind of the latest one, brings the storm very close to making a potential landfall on Oahu. Still as a hurricane in their latest forecast. We're going to get to see the latest information very soon from them, but in no way, shape, or form does this pose zero risk to those islands. It's still a high-risk situation that people there should be spending today preparing for and completing their preparations, because the worst impacts from the storm are going to be happening later today into the overnight hours for Oahu and Kauai in particular. So you might be asleep when the worst conditions are preparing, so make sure you spend today preparing to be safe from the system.
Or in an ideal world,
off.
you've already prepared and you're spending today sleeping.
That's true.
That's the dream.
Not everyone gets to do that all the time. So for those that haven't, make sure your preparations are finished within the next several hours. We've been saying that all stream, and it's always important to reiterate that because hurricane conditions are still possible on Oahu or Kauai. So in no way are we saying that there's no risk for either of those islands. They're still under high risk from this storm of potential hurricane conditions, heavy rainfall that can lead to flash flooding or mudslides as well. So stay on guard in those areas no matter what. Throughout the next 24 to 36 hours as the storm passes the region.
And the rainfall factor, which could be quite significant, though at the moment the storm would have to get a little bit closer if it's going to dump the massive amounts of rainfall. You're talking in that red band there, about 1 inch per hour of rainfall. So if you got an eye pass, then or an eye wall pass, you'd probably get about 6 or 7 hours worth of rainfall. That's 7 inches. That's at sea. Don't forget, rainfall amounts can inflate even more over land areas, especially up mountains. So you could see that rise quite a lot more.
Yeah, and something interesting I'm noticing on that radar imagery, so it's just the reflectivity of it. I'm sure you could probably comment on that better. Is it looks like there's a potential dry slot opening up between the southwestern eye wall and some of the other convection rainfall is trying to come onshore Maui right now.
It's a possibility. What I can tell you though is there's another gap in the coverage behind Maui. So northwest of there's another gap in the radar, and I can tell you those yellows towards the northwest are very near the edge of range, so it's probably worse than what that radar is showing. I can show you we're moving over quite a lot from one radar to the next because they're all showing different parts of the storm, and the more time that goes on, the more we want to start looking at Molokai's radar, which shows you this. Again, the eastern due east of that radar is cut off because of this land in front of the radar. It literally can't see through the hills. So you've got the northwestern side there is actually looking quite strong, and if we could actually just get rain rates on that, 1 hour rainfall rates, and see what it comes up with. Look at that, you've got a significant purple zone there, and that is not quite 2 inches. It must be at least 1.5 inches. Not a very good key on that, and I'm just wondering if that will animate at all. Doesn't look like. But that's just, oh, there it goes. So the purple areas there, that's probably 1.5 inches an hour. So you'd probably get at least purples if the eye wall made landfall on you right now. So if you had that for about 8 hours at worst, then 8 times 1.5, 12 inches.
Yep, so unfortunately, those are offshore at the moment. Hopefully, they don't really go onshore and stay onshore for any significant time period. But close approach to land for really harsh conditions from this system right now. And it's actually an update from chat about the windward side of Oahu not seeing impacts right now. I mean, if you take a look at satellite imagery, Oahu isn't really seeing too much from this system at all yet.
No.
But within the next 6 hours or so, conditions start to deteriorate there quite quickly. So really, your preparation should be rushed to completion if they aren't already complete in Oahu and Kauai right now. And if you want to share with us conditions about your exact location, if you're watching this from Hawaii, or just have any questions that you want to ask about this storm, start your messages at Force 13, all in text, or just the 2 words Force 13 in text. It'll make sure your message lights up in a nice bright orange for us, at least a part of it, and it makes it much easier to find it and read it out and see what's happening for you.
Especially when the chat gets clogged up.
Yeah, and that definitely happens. There's a lot of people going on, so between moderating and having to time out people sometimes, and having to read messages and question stuff, it can get a bit difficult to track everything. So it always makes it easier for us to see if you type in like what Nightbot just did right now. Those 2 words, Force 13 separated, lights up a message.
Oh,
in a
I
nice
see.
orange.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. As
Yeah.
you can see there, the view from this webcam on the eastern part of Oahu, I believe, showing that it's getting a bit cloudier. The waves don't look much more choppier at this stage, not yet. Maybe slightly more than earlier this morning, but things still pretty quiet there. It is getting a bit of a breeze on actually, but I would imagine that gusts are only in the teens.
Yeah. Someone's also saying their buddies on the windward side of Oahu are surfing. We'd really recommend you don't do that when there's a storm nearby, even if the impacts aren't happening at all directly from rain and wind. Life-threatening rip currents do happen with these systems, especially with hurricanes when they get stronger or have been stronger. Examples of this in the Atlantic that we've seen is Lorenzo, which remained thousands of miles
Oh my
away from the United
goodness.
States, actually killed multiple people because of the rip currents that it was causing. Chris of a couple of years ago didn't impact the United States with any wind or rain at all, but killed a couple of people from rip currents. So I would advise them and implore them strongly to not be doing that at all, because it can be life-threatening due to stronger rip currents that can happen from tropical cyclones.
I mean, you could be surfing at any other time. This is one of the worst times to do it. Like, this is a dangerous storm.
Yeah,
Well,
so
certainly the most
generally
dangerous
would
one
advise
in
not.
many years.
Yeah, I'm sure in a couple days when the system's fully cleared out and much more of the effects are gone, it'll be a much safer time to catch some sick waves than right now. I can tell you that for sure.
Thanks,
Someone's saying they live in the Honolulu area, and what should they expect in general from the storm right now? Well, let's see. Honolulu is that's out on. I think that's
Come
Oahu,
on, you know
right?
where Honolulu is.
Yeah. I mean, it is possible to get hurricane conditions there still, based on the latest forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. So make sure
Unlikely at this point, but tropical storm winds definitely a possibility there.
Yeah. So make sure anything that could be considered a flight risk or debris risk is tied down there immediately. Depends on how close you are to low-lying coastal area, but if you need sandbags, make sure you have those. Make sure everything's charged up with batteries. All the electronics that you need, radios, phones, whatever, charged up in case you end up losing power from the system. Make sure you have the basic supplies that you need for the next couple of days in case you do lose power, including some non-perishables. I don't know exactly which part of Honolulu you're in, though, because it is a significantly sized city. So make sure for your local weather station for your exact zip code and location as well. But any preparations that you're doing should be completed within the next 2 to 3 hours at maximum if you haven't done so already.
Again, it's better to be safe than sorry.
Someone's also asking a question. Because of those warmer sea surface temperatures on the western side of Hawaii, is it possible for it to hold its strength or re-strengthen at all? I think based on what we're seeing right now, even the sea surface temperatures are warmer. Other conditions that are going to be important for the system, such as dry air and humidity around the system, along with wind shear, are not going to be favorable at all. And you'll see the storm continue to weaken, especially as some land interaction takes place, especially if it moves over land at all directly. That would be quite disruptive to the system. So the consensus right now is it's had an opportunity to maintain its strength longer than initially forecast because of some of these warmer waters that it's in right now, but that overall weakening trend is probably already ongoing based on the recon data that we're seeing, and that should continue for this foreseeable future. The whole forecast time period and intensity right now for the National Hurricane Center only calls for further weakening of the system, and by the time we get to day 5, it's forecast to be a tropical depression, but models are saying it could even dissipate by then as well.
And this is radar imagery from the Big Island still, so it's looking straight into the storm from the southern side, and it's literally looking straight into it because it doesn't look like there's anything there on the radar in the southeastern quadrant. And we can say that with some certainty now.
Yep.
It's an open eye to the east, so that is bad news for it. Although the bad news for everyone else is that the western side appears to be the strongest, so if it is going to turn west and plough into one of these islands, then it looks like that's the strongest part of the storm.
Yeah, it is looking like that. And someone's saying that they're getting mild winds in Haiku, which is on Maui right now. That's about north. It's along the northern coast of central Maui, very close to that. So, considering what we're seeing with the satellite imagery and the radar, it's highly possible that stronger winds are starting to pick up a bit in that area. So that's not too surprising to hear.
Little bits of rain on Oahu now as well.
Yep. So
the Central Pacific Hurricane Center graphic as of the last update, and we're of course going to get a new update pretty soon here. But as of the last update, they have tropical storm force winds starting to be felt in the northeast part of Maui.
Yep, and that really wouldn't be surprising at all considering what we're seeing right now.
And the new update is out. A tropical storm warning has been issued for portions of the, I'll try this one again, Papahanau Mokuakia Marine National Monument from Nihoa to French Frigate Shoals. So that's the only change. They've put it down to 85 miles per hour and a pressure of 987 millibars, so you called it, Strat, basically.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, that's supportive of the reconnaissance data is, so slightly weaker than earlier today, but still a very dangerous and life-threatening storm nonetheless for land areas that it's going to be impacting or is impacting already. At this rate, really, if recon, I think they're actually leaving the storm right now after this third pass into Douglas. Eventually, they might have to lower it down to 80 miles an hour because some of the last SFMR passes were only getting up to 70 knots about. But still a life-threatening storm nonetheless. I will say, notably, it's really trying to flare up some convection there on the very western side of the storm, potentially trying to wrap that around a little bit at the last frame, but it's really going to have to wait at least another hour or so and see what happens with it. And I will also say, Nathan, props to you for trying to pronounce that location, because that is... I skipped it earlier. I didn't skip the location, but I skipped the actual name of it. I just said the Marine National Park.
Like the kind of thing that you would do, yeah. Okay, more questions. Actually, someone's asked us to state that opening your windows will not help.
I really don't think that's a good idea.
Which, you know, I mean, it sounds like common sense. Do people actually open their windows during a hurricane?
I've never heard of it. You really shouldn't. I mean, it's not going to be, in terms of pressure differences between outside and inside, that wouldn't create as much of an immediate issue when you open your window, with it now closer to 990 millibars than it was as it peaked down in the 950s. But that's something you definitely don't want to do because you're going to be letting those stronger winds inside your own house and potentially some rain in as well. So.
Light showers being reported in Honolulu right now. You can see there on the visible satellite picture a few low clouds that are pushing their way through associated with the storm, but it's not the main part of the storm, and that is still only just along the coast of Maui. So no one has really seen the full effects of this storm anywhere on the Hawaiian Islands yet.
And
which we do have to say is a good thing.
Yep, well, we're nearly halfway there.
Isaac?
Well, while we're talking about windows here, I just wanted to note, for any of you guys still who may be still trying to prepare for this, that taping up your windows is absolutely nothing to the structural integrity of your windows. I saw a lot of that happen with, not with this storm that I just got, but with Harvey especially, a lot of that happening. That does absolutely nothing to the structural integrity of your window. the best way of securing your window there would be by boarding up the windows. That's the best method to do there to lower the risk. I mean, of getting anything flying through your window and breaking your window and letting all those tropical storm force or hurricane force winds in and ruining your day there. So I just wanted to note that if anybody is taping your windows, that is a myth in terms of strengthening the structural integrity of your window. The best method is boarding up your windows in preparation for a hurricane here.
Would you
What
also
you're doing is just
recommend?
wasting tape.
Would you also recommend? Who's that? That's an advert. Wonderful. You'd also recommend metal shutters as well, Isaac? Would you?
Yes, if they are available, you use them. A lot of houses, especially along the coastline here, have hurricane shutters. My area, unfortunately, doesn't. But yeah, a lot of areas especially around the coast, have hurricane shutters and have stronger building codes due to the fact, of course, they are near the water and they're going to get the higher winds than say farther inland here. But yeah, if there are any hurricane shutters, do take advantage of those and do some last-minute preparations if you haven't done so already before the conditions start to deteriorate here with time. So
Strap being his kind, gentle self there, apologising on behalf of everyone.
I also like to point out, because someone did say this in chat, this was actually issued a little while ago, but it's going to be in place for some time. There is a flood advisory for the island of Maui in Maui County right now for another about 2 hours and 10 minutes or so, as of radar indicated rain of 1 to 2 inches near Paia. I think that's how you pronounce it. Paia is the name of that exact location.
Wow.
So there is a flood advisory in effect due to expected rain rates.
Yeah, I don't think National Hurricane Centre's cone is out yet, but judging by the coordinates they've put in their forecast, they're now calling for the centre of the storm to move within 2 miles of Oahu, but not make landfall.
Well, I at that point, it's like you're basically having a landfall, or the effects of one at least.
And then
Yeah, I
after
mean,
that,
at that
it
point, you're
looks
really
like,
having the eyeball scrape along.
I think they are calling for a landfall on Kauai,
Yeah, so to the person that was wondering
and
if
it will
we were
still
saying,
be a hurricane by then.
yeah, so to the person that's trying to say there won't be impacts in Oahu, this is all you really need to know to say that there very likely will be impacts.
Isaac, is it out yet?
nope, I'm just refreshing the page here, trying to find it when it does come out.
Yeah, we're just waiting for that latest National Hurricane Center cone. We're going to finish up here shortly because we've obviously been tracking this storm for a while, and it's continuing west-northwest. It's making its closest pass to Maui. We'll probably have more updates and maybe even more live coverage when it passes Oahu. But we'll definitely have a lot of videos on our YouTube channel, which of course you can subscribe to for the latest information, and also on our social media platforms. Search at Force 13 on Facebook and Twitter.
And if you want to join the community, you can also join our Discord.
There is also our Discord server, and you can see that at the bottom there on that white bar, as well as our contact email if you feel so inclined, particularly if you want to help us out, because we do all of this well, without much support, let's say. Apart from the support of our community, of course, which is very good indeed. But you know, a lot of this is community based, and we do a lot of good work through it. But in the meantime, I think that's pretty much everything for now. Any final words from our team?
I mean,
Nope.
If you haven't done any preparations at this point in time, for those of you out ahead of the system, especially those of you on Kauai, because you guys have a more likely chance of getting hurricane force winds here than Oahu has right at this point in time. So if you haven't done your hurricane preparations already, you got to get them done now, immediately. This storm is moving at a relatively fast rate of speed. This isn't going to be a Hurricane Douglas. This isn't going to be a Hurricane Hannah. It's been a long day here. It's not going to be a Hurricane
been a long
Hannah
week.
here, because Hannah was slowing down pretty much at landfall. This is pretty much at a steady speed here, over 10 miles per hour. So if you haven't done your preparations on Oahu and Kauai, you got to get them done now. Again, if you are gonna put anything on your windows, either board them up or put hurricane shutters on them. Again, tape does absolutely nothing to the structural integrity of your windows. I saw a lot of that with Harvey here. That does absolutely nothing. The best bet is to either board up your windows or put hurricane shutters on your windows if those are available to you at this point in time.
Absolutely concur with all that, and please make sure if you're in harm's way from the system right now, or Kauai, that you're doing everything you can to stay as safe as you can. You'll get through this. It's a strong and dangerous system, but if you're taking the proper precautions, you'll be safe and okay. So, other than that, just thank you so much for watching us in our live coverage, and please do everything you can to stay safe during this storm.
It has weakened
Absolutely.
slightly. We're just going to stay on for a few more minutes whilst the National Hurricane Centre's chart comes out, and that allows us the opportunity to introduce David. Good morning to you over there in Australia.
Good morning from Brisbane, where multiple rescues are taking place again in Sydney, the entire Queensland border down to the Victorian border under a severe weather warning.
So it's happening everywhere then.
It is happening over everywhere, Nathan. The earthquake activity really ramped up yesterday. There's been a small one over in South Africa, and I've been monitoring the stream here, but we've got a deepening low pressure system off the southern coast, and it's supposed to move back up towards my area, Nathan, but Bureau Meteorology has issued 2 severe weather warnings, Victoria, New South Wales, and considering what's happening in those 2 states, they don't need the severe weather, but flood warnings also in place, and flood watch.
Just continuing to wait here just a few more minutes for the National Hurricane Centre's cone, because I feel it would be a little bit silly not to show that before we finished up here. But in any event, the storm looks like now it's making its closest approach to Maui, and it would appear that from looking at their previous cone that it's probably moved. Well, maybe it's about what they expected actually. Hard to tell. It's about 50 miles offshore as it is right now. I'm just looking back at their previous cone and what they went for. And yeah, it looks like it might have deviated north by just a couple of miles. Not much in the grand scheme of things.
I mean, regardless, a couple miles shift, while it could change the overall outcome for a full-on landfall on, either Oahu or Kauai several hours from now, the key messages with this really stay the same, as it's a very life-threatening storm with the potential to deliver a tropical storm or on parts of Oahu or Kauai if the forecast cone that's coming out right now seems to be completely correct hurricane conditions to parts of Hawaii. So please do everything you can to stay safe and informed over the next 12 to 24 hours as the storm passes the region.
We might be able to take 1 or 2 more questions whilst we keep waiting for this graphic to appear. I just feel it's quite important to get that graphic shown, especially since the warnings have been extended. But at the minute we're still looking at the radar imagery, and Isaac, you've got your radar up there as well. Have you noticed anything else interesting in the eye recently?
Not really, just that the eastern part seems again to be kind of fragmented here, as we've seen on this radar, and then we go over to the Molokai radar and see if I could see it a little bit better. I know there's a gap also on that one due to the mountainous terrain of that island as well. From what I'm seeing though is that so far Maui and then a few other islands around it seem to be getting, of course, the outer rain bands of this Hurricane Douglas, and then the extreme northeastern part of Maui, as of the previous Central Pacific Hurricane Center cone, did have them in the tropical storm force wind radius, and I'm assuming that's probably going to be extended more north now, and in the latest update when it does come out, the cone does come out soon.
Well, we hope so.
I know it takes them a little while to get their graphics ready over there, especially since They're understaffed over in the Central Pacific
Yeah.
Hurricane Center, so
Of course,
Yeah.
when we do go off with air, we're not completely abandoning everyone. We do have our automated feed that's running 24/7 on our live page, youtube.com/force13/live. That's been in operation for just over 3 days now, and it's going to be a new 24/7 operation that will be running continuously, indefinitely now. So that's another thing that we've got there.
And that, if another easy way to get it, it's the pinned comment right now on the live stream. So if you're looking for that when our live coverage wraps up, it's in the chat right now. And
Got a
it's the
few
pinned
cool little stats in there as well.
Of course,
And
that's always-
also the US channel.
Yes, well, they actually ran radar of this earlier today, didn't they? In the early hours of this
They're
morning.
continuing to do it.
They are still doing that, yeah. So you can hop over there for the live radar in between all of the updates as well. We've got it all covered from all angles, everywhere. But most of this is just us talking until the advisory cone changes. Any questions, Strat?
say, if you have any last second questions that can be answered in about a sentence or so, there's a lot of people I know right now. So spam it in the chat, rapid fire.
Don't
tell people to
spam.
No,
Did
no,
he
no,
say spam?
no, I'm not saying spam your message multiple times again and again and again. I'm just saying, people in general ask a lot of questions here for the last second so we can keep the conversation going as much as we can.
Nightbot is gonna have a field day in there.
Oh no.
Don't repeat your message multiple times in a row. Just
Somebody
Put it-
asked if the storm is big. The answer is kinda.
It's not really as far as hurricanes go.
There,
I mean-
that was a good rapid fire question.
yeah. Why does the NHC transfer coverage to the CPHC? That's the question.
That goes back years, and I don't know the reason.
All I know is that they're slightly understaffed.
Just say bureaucracy.
It could be. I'm not sure.
Nathan, an observation. I've been monitoring the Treader platform, and there's not much activity coming out of Hawaii on that platform this system.
Well, there aren't that many populated places or highly populated places that are experiencing inclement conditions. Honolulu getting a little bit of rain right now, and maybe winds gusting to near tropical storm strength. But a lot of the population is on Oahu, and there's not much going on there just yet. Just a few showers.
Yep.
Even the local government agencies haven't even cited anything.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it was an emergency declaration was made yesterday at the federal level for the whole state. So they have extra resources freed up and able to use to combat this situation when this is all wrapped up and said and done. We got a question. Someone said they just woke up. Is it a tropical storm or hurricane? Still a Category 1 hurricane. 85 miles an hour is the last update, valid as of 2 minutes ago. So 85 miles an hour, moderate Category 1 storm. And also a reminder, I'm seeing do not crack your windows open on your house. Do
What?
not do that. Someone was trying to say crack your windows open during a hurricane and tropical storm.
No, don't do that.
That's
Incredibly reckless.
That's a really bad idea, because once the wind comes into your house, it has to escape some way, and the way that it'll do that is through a roof or gables or things like that. They actually did scientific studies on it, and originally the hypothesis was that the house, because it was at a higher pressure than the external environment, the walls would blow out because the windows were closed. It held the pressure in. But the scientists, after doing the studies, actually found out that when the windows are cracked, that's when you build up the higher pressure in the house by allowing the wind in, and the wind to find its escape paths through cracks in the walls, through the gables and things like that. And so that idea of cracking your windows during a hurricane has been thoroughly debunked. Do not do it.
Exactly.
Nelson, do you want to explain your graphics here again as well whilst
Yes.
we wait for the latest cone?
Yes, this is base velocity from the Kohala radar on Hawaii. It shows the colors in purple are below tropical storm force. The blues that you see are tropical storm force winds measured by radar. And the greens are hurricane force winds, Category 1 hurricane force winds registered by the radar. Now you have to take into account that those greens that you see on the southeast side are at 5,900 feet is where the radar beam hits. But these blues that you see over Maui between Pauwela and Wailua are at about 4,000 feet above ground level. So what you can see is that there are possibly at those altitudes tropical storm force winds, and they are sustained because you see them through so many cycles of the radar graphic. Now, if you see something pop up and go away, it's most likely a gust. But basically, this just delineates the storm wind fields from the Kohala radar, and I can switch over to Molokai real quick, and you will see obviously the wind fields will extend here on the northwest side, where you can see the greater than 74 mile an hour winds and the greater than 95 mile an hour winds, which would be a Category 2. But again, that's at 8,500 feet when you look at the radar. So there may be some tropical storm force winds affecting Maui right now. All the rest of them are off of the islands. So again, as people have been mentioning in the chat, the big issue with this storm on the islands right now is rain, the possibility of mudslides, but you could get those tropical storm force winds sustained or gusting at this time, as the radars show.
Absolutely. And, this radar is actually looking pretty accurate because it does verify those Category 2, at least flight level hurricane winds well up into the air a bit. We do know, though, fortunately, that the winds that strength are not transferring down to the surface at all. We're down to 85 miles an hour as a maximum.
Most of the eye now visible on the radar imagery, and I think we should read out the National Hurricane Center discussion that they've put out for 11 a.m. Whilst we continue to wait for them to draw their cone. Hurricane hunters from the Air Force 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron are back out sampling Douglas. The hurricane has been resilient, with deep convection persisting to the west and north of the center under increasing vertical wind shear. The hurricane hunters have found that the center pressure has risen slightly, and a blend of SFMR and adjusted flight level winds supports lowering the initial intensity to 75 knots, that's 85 miles an hour. Island-based radars are detecting the mid-level circulation of Douglas, which could be tilted slightly to the north due to wind shear. Slow weakening is expected as Douglas passes near or over portions of the main Hawaiian Islands. Sea surface temperatures will slowly increase along the forecast track, but subtly vertical wind shear will tilt the system and disrupt the circulation aloft, leading to gradual weakening through at least the next 4 days. However, Douglas is expected to remain a hurricane as it passes very near or over portions of the main Hawaiian Islands today and tonight. The intensity forecast has changed very little. Let's see what else we've got on that. Anything of interest? It's quite a long message. The key messages, though: Douglas will pass dangerously close to or over the islands today and tonight, bringing in a triple threat of hazards, including but not limited to damaging winds, flooding rainfall, and dangerously high surf, especially along east-facing shores. It remains important that you do not focus on the exact forecast track of Douglas. Due to its angle of approach to the islands, any wobble in the track could lead to significant differences in where the worst weather occurs. Even if the centre remains offshore, severe impacts could still be realised over the islands as they extend well away from the centre. Terrain effects can also cause strong localised acceleration of the wind through gaps and where winds blow down slope. These acceleration areas will shift with time as Douglas passes near the islands. Hurricane force wind gusts are possible even within the tropical storm warning area, which might be an interesting one to note, and winds will also be stronger at the upper floors of high-rise buildings. So that's the full forecast discussion pretty much, and that they expect that it will be 80 miles an hour as it makes its closest pass to Oahu.
Yep, and that goes to a question I saw in the chat a little bit earlier. Someone's asking which direction the storm expected to go. It's likely right now, at least based on the latest cone, it's hard to get too much variance this close within 24 hours, but like the National Hurricane Center said, slight wobbles or very small variances in the actual track can mean significant changes in where the absolute worst impacts occur. Oahu and Kauai are both going to get potentially quite close to a landfall from this storm. If not, the storm might actually come on shore slightly, although I think you said from the latest forecast cone, 2 miles off from doing so, correct?
2 miles off, yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be very close. So very dangerous conditions can be occurring there on both those islands as we head into later today and tonight their time. So everyone there should be doing absolutely everything they can to rush their preparations to completion if they have not done so already. Really, your preparation should already be done, and you should be doing everything you can to stay as safe as possible during the next 24 to 30 hours.
Well, the cone still isn't out from the National Hurricane Center. Yes, they must be understaffed over there.
They are.
People have been talking about that for a while. But we've explained the track, I think, well enough. But once it comes out, I guess you can see it on the National Hurricane Center's website.
Yeah, we got someone saying, looks like Maui will be spared the eye wall. Right now it's looking quite likely. Unfortunately, they'll be spared most of the eye wall of this system.
Yep.
But heavier rainfall and tropical storm force winds are still possible across the island. Someone specifying, when will it hit Oahu? About what time? Its closest approach is going to be at around 06Z, which is global time, which is about 2 a.m. Eastern,
No,
which
it
is,
isn't.
if I'm not, oh, it's not 2 a.m. Eastern? Okay.
About 8 p.m., I think that is.
Yeah, it's about 8 p.m. local time for them. So, heading into the evening, into overnight, is when Oahu and Kauai are going to both see some of the worst conditions with this storm. So if you're there, please stay extremely vigilant ahead of potential impacts.
Nathan, somebody in the chat's drawing attention to the cone interactive map.
Isaac, you were keeping your eyes on that a moment ago.
Yeah, it's been kind of glitchy with me, so I'm going to try it again and see if there's any change here.
It's been all glitchy.
Yeah, well, this is what the latest has on the interactive map. Let me go ahead and put labels on there.
That's oh dear, music's gone. Wasn't supposed to do that. We'll do the outro again in a moment then. There's the old cone. That's still the old one.
Mm-hmm. Because it still shows extreme northeastern part of Maui with tropical storm force winds being felt.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming they've changed that in a new update whenever...
It won't have changed very much in track or intensity, and I guess we'll leave it at that. I'll play the music again. I didn't know it would do that. Okay, well, whatever, there we go. This was Force 13 Live. We hope you've enjoyed the coverage, if possible. I know not usually enjoyable circumstances, but we try and make people feel at home as much as possible. I just personally don't like how sanitized the news are all the time. Now they just, well, you know what they're like these days. We're a little bit different here. If you've got any concerns, of course you can follow our live feed in real time all the time at youtube.com/force13/live, and you can follow us on social media on all of our channels on Facebook and Twitter. Search Force 13. You can also send me an email, contact@force13.com, or join our Discord server. If you haven't heard of Discord before, that's a fairly new, not so new anymore actually, chat messaging platform. And we're on there as well, so discord.gg/force13 for live chat with hundreds of other tropical cyclone trackers. But that's all for now. We'll have more video updates on the Force 13 channel later this evening, or my time this evening, later today in Hawaii. But until then, stay safe out there. It's another tough ride for some people out there. Hopefully, that storm will stay far north. Good night and good day.
Aloha.